Calculated Risk, A Cross-Security Investigation, Book 2. Written by G.K.Parks, narrated by Danny Holt. Chapter 21.
"At least you didn't have to stay here all night,"
Justin said when he showed up a little after 10. I should have.
Uh-oh.
He closed the door to my office.
Do I want to know?
Jade wasn't paranoid. She was right. Some asshole was stalking her.
Is she okay?
She's fine. She's not here. He is. Problem solved, right?
Just to satisfy my own curiosity, did you have to make any late-night calls to Mr. Almeida? Or, I don't know, buy a shovel in the middle of the night?
He's fine. Probably better than I am.
What about the two jerks who beat up Freddy? Is one of them the same guy who was stalking Jade?
No, but I thought he was. It turns out Freddy was attacked by hired muscle. I don't know who hired them or why. I pushed my chair back and put my feet up on the edge of my desk. To be frank, I don't know anything. I rocked back as far as the seat would go without tipping over. I don't even know the name of the hired muscle's accomplice.
Have you spoken to Jade?
Why would I?
To tell her she isn't crazy? That she didn't imagine it?
What good would that do? She doesn't feel safe. Telling her would only make it worse.
Suit yourself.
From his tone, I knew he disagreed with my thoughts on the matter.
Who was stalking her?
Danny Foster. He drives a silver SUV with a bike rack. That's how I found him. It was purely accidental. I was looking for the guys who attacked Freddy and robbed Knox's house. I scratched my head, finding that I despised Trey Knox.
You mean that kid you scared the other morning had nothing to do with anything, right?
I guess not. At the time, I thought he was lying. Maybe I didn't have a nose for this kind of work.
All right, so what's your next play?
I puffed out my cheeks and blew out a breath. I get back to what matters. Cross security needs to expand, possibly hire some additional investigators to deal with these types of issues. I rubbed my eyes. What we need to do is find the ideal office space, get our new hire situated, and build our client list. As far as Knox goes, I can't do anything until the thieves try to fence the stolen merchandise. And as far as Freddy goes, I'm waiting to get an ID on the second perp before I do anything.
That sounds sensible.
Justin cocked an eyebrow at me.
Which leads me to my next question.
What?
Who are you and what did you do with Lucien Cross?
I've spent the entire night going over this, waiting for a lead on the intel, and even with it, I still can't make a move. I dropped my feet to the floor and climbed out of the chair. I'm going home to take a nap. I'll be back in a couple of hours. Hold down the fort until then.
You got it, boss.
Slipping into my jacket, I didn't bother checking facial rec again. I would have heard the ping. Instead, I left the office, went straight home, and dropped onto the bed without taking the time to even kick off my shoes. My phone woke me. I opened my eyes and reached for the device. Freddy sent me a text message in response to the one I had sent him earlier. He'd spoken to every contact he could think of who specialized in rare collector's items. He didn't name names, so I did. Alexei Balakin. Do you know him? He and one of his buddies attacked you last night, I wrote. After sending the text, I got myself cleaned up and rummaged through the fridge. A few containers of leftover Chinese stared back at me. I grabbed a fork and ate while standing at the counter. I stared at the table, picturing Jade, with her legs tucked beneath her, animatedly gesturing with the chopsticks while eating the beef and broccoli. I had it bad, but I had to let it go. I had to let her go. It was done. Over. I dropped the container into the trash and grabbed a bottle of juice from the fridge and drank out of it. Danny Foster was lucky to be alive. My phone beeped.
Not personally, by reputation.
Texting back and forth was ridiculous. I hit the speed dial and waited for Freddy to answer. What do you mean by reputation? I asked.
Alexei's connected.
Connected to whom?
Come on, Lucy, I'm not going to spell it out for you. He collects debts and makes sure everyone pays up. He's been known to make examples out of people.
Who do you owe?
No one. His voice went up an octave. I trade in favors. I don't leave outstanding debts for more than a few days, and that's only when a client takes his sweet time paying up.
I left payment with you last night, I said.
Not you, he sighed. Thanks for paying off the doc. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. I hoped he'd get back on track, but the silence dragged. I don't know anyone either. but you said he and the other guy stole from you and said it was to make up for the added trouble. You also said this had to do with me, that I was supposed to have been there?"
"About that," Freddie chuckled uncomfortably. "Maybe I got it wrong. I'm not exactly sure what went down. A lot of it is fuzzy."
"You seemed clear last night."
"I was out of my mind last night."
"Freddie, tell me the truth. I can help."
"I don't know. Seriously, I don't. I've been making calls all afternoon, but I can't figure it out. None of my regulars have anything to do with loan sharks or the people Alexei usually works for."
"You must have spoken to someone new."
"The only new people were the ones I contacted about the ring. There could be overlap. Sports betting is a big business."
"I know." Again, I thought about Trey Knox and possible motives for the break-in. But I didn't have anything solid to indicate he had a gambling problem. His behavior hadn't changed. He didn't appear erratic or unstable, at least not to any extreme, and he told me in no uncertain terms to back off of him. He'd been right. I wouldn't have questioned a corporate client like this.
"Look, Lucien, I like you. You know that. But I can't get your ring. I don't know if last night had anything to do with that, but it might. And I can't afford that kind of trouble again."
"I understand. I just wanted to know who you reached out to."
"The usual places. Local fences, the dark web. A few bookies I know who are dialed into the sports scene."
Bookies. That had to be the connection. It fit, and Freddie knew it. "Just give me their names."
"I'm sorry.
Freddie, I'll pay for the intel. I don't care."
"I'm sorry."
He hung up before I could argue further. That had to be the connection. Alexei worked for loan sharks, which went hand in hand with bookies. Someone, a client, a bookie, the house, one of them must have heard about Knox's collection. Whether they orchestrated the theft or simply purchased the stolen goods was anyone's guess. But Knox wouldn't talk to me about any of this. He wouldn't even entertain the possibility. I'd pissed him off after he pissed me off, so I doubted he'd want to assist in the investigation. "Justin," I said as soon as he answered, "I need you to sweet-talk Knox and smooth things over." I explained the situation. "See what he'll tell you. Just don't accuse him of gambling. That's a sensitive subject."
"All right, I'll try."
"Thanks. I'm on my way back." I glanced at my fridge. "I'll grab some Chinese food for dinner." As predicted, Knox didn't offer any helpful details. Alexei's accomplice was a nobody. He didn't have a criminal record, at least none the local police knew about, and he didn't work at McGinty's. I thought about running the photo through the larger national and international criminal databases, but I had access and time constraints to consider. Instead, I spent the next few days focused on interviews, signing new corporate clients and working through the security reviews and having upgrades installed as quickly as possible for Mr. Rathbone and 2 other clients. I left the Knox case on the back burner. I was getting itchy and had to find an outlet for the pent-up energy. Working on what I could control and the things I knew how to do helped, like a release valve siphoning off the excess pressure. Almost an entire week had passed without incident. I'd just finished an assessment and had placed a call into King Realty to check on their progress when the alert sounded on my phone. One of the GPS trackers had been activated. I'd gotten 2 of these alerts in the last few days, both of which had been false alarms, so I waited to see where the yellow dot would travel. After 5 minutes, I was certain it was headed for Paulie's pawn. "Justin, I gotta go." I didn't bother with instructions. Instead, I raced out of the office and down the stairs. Hitting the unlock as I jogged to my car, I got inside, gunned the engine, and peeled out of the space. With one eye on the road and the other on my phone, I wondered if I'd make it to the pawn shop in time. When I arrived, the yellow dot was still 2 streets away. The moving van was coming from the opposite direction, so I did my best to find a parking space with a decent vantage point. But with limited time, I couldn't dawdle. Leaving my car in the first empty spot I found, I walked down the street, scanning for somewhere to hide. When I couldn't come up with anything, I stopped at the end of the line near a food truck and stared at my phone. The yellow dot turned onto the street. I tucked my phone away the moment the white panel van came into view. The driver parked in a loading zone near the pawn shop. The parking signs warned it was 5-minute parking, and unauthorized vehicles would be towed at the owner's expense. The driver's side door opened and a man in jeans and a green sweatshirt stepped out. He wore a baseball cap with the bill pulled down. Specks of scruff stuck out on his chin and down his neck, but it wasn't quite a beard, at least not yet. Removing my phone, I moved as the line did, snapping shots of the man while blending in with the crowd. Baseball cap went to the side of the van, slid open the door, and grabbed a duffel bag out of the back. He slung it over his shoulder, closed the door, and knocked on the side door to the pawn shop. As soon as he went inside, I dashed across the street. No one else was inside the van. When he'd opened the doors, I didn't see anything in the back, but I couldn't be sure. I checked all the doors, but they were locked. Quickly, I wrote down the van's details. I'd need that in order to figure out who rented this particular van, and if they also rented a storage unit, and which one. Then I went back to my car, started the engine, and crept slowly toward the van, searching for spots along the way. A Jeep was in the midst of pulling out of a space, so I put on my blinker and waited. The vehicle had out-of-state plates, and from the way the driver edged forward and back in the tight space, I didn't think he'd had much experience parallel parking. While the guy proceeded to attempt what appeared to be a 700-point turn, the van driver exited the pawn shop with an empty duffel bag. He climbed behind the wheel and pulled out. I waited a few seconds before turning off my blinker and swerving around the Jeep. I tailed the van back to the self-storage facility, but I didn't dare enter the gates. Instead, I continued past the facility, keeping an eye on things from outside the fence. The rows of buildings concealed me from the van, but also concealed the van from me. This wouldn't do. At the first break between buildings, I turned the nose of my car inward and pushed forward as far as possible, brushing up against the fence. This wasn't a parking spot, but it'd do. Creeping around the fence, I'd hoped to see where the van had gone. The driver parked it in the middle of the row, with the rest of the rentable vehicles. He carried the duffel in one hand. I edged around the outside of the fence, hoping to see where he was going. He wasn't heading toward the front gate. If the fence wasn't so tall, I would have climbed it. Instead, I jogged along the outside, past a long row of self-storage units, until I happened upon another break. I couldn't see much, but Baseball Cap had opened one of the units. Grabbing my phone, I tried to zoom in on the number, but even the lens on the camera wasn't good enough to pick up the old, faded numbers at this angle and distance. Deciding this wasn't going to work, I ran around the perimeter, sliding to a stop near the limited number of parking spaces. One of these vehicles had to belong to Baseball Cap. I was about to snap photos of each of the license plates when the gate squeaked open and the man emerged. On instinct, I dove behind a dumpster brimming with cardboard pieces and dismantled boxes. The man who drove the van didn't get into any of the vehicles. By the time I realized my mistake and peered around the dumpster, he'd disappeared around the corner. I dashed to the edge of the property and scanned the sidewalk in both directions, but he'd vanished. Chapter 22. I walked up and down the rows of storage units, twirling my keyring around my finger. I knew roughly where he'd been standing. That narrowed it down to 3 possible units. Each one had a heavy-duty lock. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. I could break it, or try to pick it. The sound of tires on gravel caught my attention. I stepped to the side, reversing course, and heading for my own unit. A woman and 2 young children got out of the car and went to one of the storage units across from where I'd been standing.
"You can pick 2 things to take with you. That's it. You know we don't have a lot of room at your aunt's house," the woman said. "Mommy," the boy tugged at her arm, "can I unlock the door?" "Go ahead, babe." She handed him the key, and he raced toward one of the units. His sister waited for their mom, who was trying to wrestle a second large box out of the back seat. "I can help," the little girl said. "That's okay, sweetie. This is too heavy for you." The woman groaned and dropped the box onto the sidewalk. "Go help your brother with the door."
"Excuse me," I crossed to her. "You look like you could use some help." She gave me a look as she tried to stack one box on top of the other, but couldn't quite get them off the ground.
"You could say that."
"Here." I bent over, careful to lift with my legs. She grabbed the top box, lightening the load, and I followed her toward the storage unit.
"Thank you. I'm sorry that's so heavy."
"What do you have in here, bricks?" I teased.
"Dumbbells."
"I guess that means I can skip lifting at the gym today." She laughed.
"You can put it down right here."
She pointed to an empty spot on the floor.
"No one's ever offered to help me before."
"It's my pleasure." I backed out of the unit, hesitant to ask about the units directly across from hers. "You wouldn't happen to know the guy who rents that unit, would you?" I pointed behind me.
"Sorry, I don't."
I gave her my friendliest smile. "No problem. I found a set of keys on the ground near there, and I thought they might belong to whoever rents the unit." I held up my own key ring. "I was just on my way to turn them in at the office."
"You're just an all-around good Samaritan."
"I'm trying." I made my way back to the front gate and pushed the button to let myself out. Just like my last visit, the office wasn't busy. The same guy was behind the desk reading a textbook. This time it was on postmodernism. "Can I help you?" he asked, his eyes still on the page. "I was wondering if you have a bathroom I could use." He looked up at me. Vague recognition crossed his face. "Not for the public, but I guess it'd be okay to let you use it this once." He pointed to a door off to the side. I went around the desk and pulled open the door. It led directly into a bathroom, which made the one in my office look huge. I pressed up against the sink in order to close the door. Closing the toilet seat lid, I stepped on top of it and slid one of the ceiling tiles out of the way. With the light from my phone, I peered around inside the ceiling until I found a few thick cable wires. They must connect to the router or modem. Stepping down from the toilet, I checked my pockets for something to cut the cords, but I didn't have a knife with me. The best I could do was a bottle opener on my keychain. I'd have to be better prepared in the future. After far too long, I managed to fray and sever one of the cables. Since I didn't get electrocuted in the process, I hoped I cut the right one. With the internet on the fritz, the office security system should be offline. I could come back after close and get the intel I needed. After flushing the toilet and washing my hands, I made sure the ceiling tile was back in place and I wasn't covered in dust. Then I let myself out of the bathroom and went back around the counter. "Thanks." "Sure, have a good one." I returned to my office to dig up everything I could on the self-storage facility. My initial assessment had been correct. The office security system required a network connection. Without it, the security system wouldn't send a notification that someone was lurking out front or report a breach from the sensors that surrounded the door. Thank you, wireless network. From what I'd seen, the facility's computer was outdated, along with the software. Payment took a few seconds longer to process than most other places, which made me think customer information, including rental agreements and schedule information, was contained on the hard drive. Databases and spreadsheets. I knew how to work the indexing options. Figuring in a slow boot up and shutdown process, I should be in and out in 10 minutes. "Need anything else, boss?" Justin asked. "Did Mr. Almeida approve the drafts we sent him on the contract proposals?" "A courier dropped them off while you were out." He picked up the manila envelope out of the intake box and held it out for me. "How many more hires do you want to take on?" "As many as we can." I glanced up. "I should be here first thing in the morning, but if for some reason I'm delayed, you have a copy of the questions and the minimum requirements I set for new hires." "Why would you be delayed?" "Who knows?" I turned my attention back to the computer. "But I trust your judgment." "Uh-huh, sure." He didn't believe me, but he didn't waste his breath on an interrogation. In most cases, the less he knew, the better for both of us. After he left, I uploaded the photos I'd taken of Baseball Cap and tried to clean them up, but I couldn't get anything usable. The computer extrapolated a few details and spat them out. 5'8" to 6 foot, 170 to 200 pounds. That didn't do much for me. Based on what little I could see of the face and skin tone, I assumed I was looking for a white guy with dark hair. None of those facts were particularly helpful. I could go to Paulie's and ask, but that didn't seem like a good idea. Instead, I switched gears, reviewed the employment contracts to make sure we didn't miss any typos, and poured myself a drink. The impending break-in had made me jittery. A little something to calm the nerves wouldn't hurt. When I finished doing everything in the office that I could possibly think of, including dusting the furniture, I locked up and headed home to change. Comfortable dark clothing and good shoes were a must. After that, I filled my pockets with lock-picking gear, a Swiss Army knife, wire cutters, a set of miniature screwdrivers, and an external hard drive. Once I was sure I had all my bases covered, I headed back to the self-storage facility. The cameras posted around the perimeter had probably caught sight of me earlier. I hadn't done anything illegal, so it didn't matter, but if my break-in was detected, the police would have questions. Making a mental note to delete the footage, I parked my car in a garage a few blocks away, cognizant of the cameras as I exited with my face down and my collar up. I didn't want to put a hood on or wear a mask in the garage. That would look suspicious as hell. I'd wait until I was closer to do that. My heartbeat quickened the closer I got to the facility. The few parking spaces out front were empty. The lights were off in the office. As far as I could tell, no one was around. Still, it was a 24-hour self-serve facility. That didn't mean someone wouldn't show up. It was fairly early, a little after 9. I didn't want to wait too long. Police patrols picked up at night. It'd be safer to do this now. Ducking behind the dumpsters, I pulled a ski mask on over my face and left my outer jacket, a dark parka, behind the dumpster. Hopefully, it'd still be there by the time I returned. Having altered my appearance enough to argue the person seen breaking into the office couldn't have been me, I sidled up to the door. In a moment, I'd know if I cut the correct wire on my earlier visit. I'd also learn if my assumption was correct about the security system not functioning without an internet connection. For all I knew, it could have a contingency figured in, using phone lines, but I didn't think so. My lockpicks worked the tumblers with ease, and the door popped open in 20 seconds. Definitely not the best lock. When all was said and done, perhaps I should drop a cross-security advertisement beneath the door, snickering at the hubris such an act would require, along with a heavy dose of dumbassery. I held my breath and crept inside. No alarm sounded. I scanned the corners of the room for blinking red lights, but found none. Shutting the door, I flipped the lock and made my way around the desk. So far, so good. The computer came to life and asked for my username and password. Bypassing it would take extra time. After another quick glance out the door, I put the flashlight in my teeth and searched the desk for any notes. Beneath the desk pad calendar, I found a tattered sticky note. Bingo. I keyed in the information and waited. The computer seemed uncertain about the entry, as if it didn't believe I was the user in question. Then it let out a welcoming chime, and the room brightened as the light blue background filled the screen. Taking a seat, I searched the hard drive, unsure of what naming conventions the management might have chosen. Within a minute, I'd found a customer database for the unit rentals. Now I just had to find the van rentals and link the two. The van rental information was contained in a separate file labeled Moving Additions. I nearly overlooked it, but as soon as I found out who rented the van earlier today, I got the customer's name. Eric Beaufort. Beaufort paid cash in advance for a 1-year rental. He had another 4 months left on the lease. I wrote down the unit number and shut down the computer. Unlocking the door, I peered out the window, making sure no one had arrived. The lot remained empty, so I stepped out and relocked the door using my lockpicks. That took longer, but it was done. Just as I was about to turn around, a car pulled up. I stuffed the picks into my pocket. I had nowhere to go. As I turned around, I slid the mask up on my face so it looked more like a watch cap instead of a ski mask. A guy rolled down his window to enter the code to unlock the gate. "They close at 9, he said. "Oh, yeah, I just saw the sign." I stuffed my hands in my pockets and walked away. That was close. Too close. I couldn't risk checking out the storage unit now, so I ducked back behind the dumpster and waited. As it grew later, it got colder. I put my parka back on and headed for the street. I was just a guy taking a stroll. No reason for anyone to think otherwise. 2 blocks away was a bus stop, so I took a seat on the bench and waited. 40 minutes later, the car drove away. By then, my legs were stiff and my ass was numb from sitting on the cold, hard bench. More than anything, I wanted to get this over with. I just didn't know if opening Eric Beaufort's unit would reveal Knox's stolen items, or if this would be another dead end. Ditching my jacket again, I entered the code at the automatic gate. It opened, and I went through. I went to the unit and made fast work of the lock. The unit was 12 by 30. From floor to ceiling, every inch was filled with shelves and boxes. I let out a sigh and closed the door. This would take me all night. Chapter 23. I had no idea who Eric Beaufort was, but I was positive of one thing. He was a criminal. The boxes on the shelves appeared to be organized chronologically. The ones nearest to the door contained the stolen items from Trey Knox's house. I didn't find any cash, but I found his tablet, watches, and most of his sports collection. The items had been divided into 3 large moving boxes. At the bottom of the last box, I found the championship ring in a lucite box, seated on a velvet pillow. Tucking the ring into my pocket, I looked down the row of other boxes, wondering how many thefts Eric and his accomplices committed. They probably all had access to the storage unit, and from the looks of it, they'd been quite busy. How long had this been going on? I did a quick count of the boxes, stopping when I hit 100. Several wooden crates were situated in the back corner of the room. They had international markings all over them. Art, I thought, or artifacts. Picking up a pry bar that had been resting against a cabinet along the back wall, I opened one of the crates. The crinkled, hay-colored packing material filled most of the box. Beneath that, I found a dozen assault rifles. Shit! Without thinking, I popped open the box inside. More automatic assault weapons, a few grenades, and some knives. The team of thieves could be smugglers. It'd explain why most of Knox's items hadn't been pawned. The buyers were probably overseas. But why was the World Series pennant available for sale at a local pawn shop? Shifting through the materials in a third crate, I removed a false top layer which held various ceramic pots and found 50 or so bricks of what I could only assume was cocaine. Thoughts of the men who attacked Freddy came to mind. They took his coke. That could be a coincidence, but it didn't feel like one. I stepped away from the crates and stared at the shelves of boxes. On a whim, I opened a random box from somewhere in the middle. It contained jewelry, likely stolen. The voice in my head reminded me this wasn't my problem. All I had to do was grab Knox's stuff and call it a job well done. He only really wanted the ring. I could walk off with that, leave the rest undisturbed, and get away scot-free. I didn't know the police anything. Officer Gallo said the detective in charge of the investigation was zeroing in on the culprits, but he thought the culprits were a bunch of bored rich kids. Whoever burglarized Knox's house wasn't a bored rich kid. It's not your problem, I reminded myself. But the guns and drugs nagged at me. They had international labels indicating they'd recently arrived in this country. They weren't getting shipped out. They had just come in, which meant they'd be hitting the streets soon. And while I didn't have a moral high ground when it came to recreational substances, the addition of automatic assault weapons left a bad taste in my mouth and a sinking feeling in my gut. Gang wars. It was the only thing I could come up with. No one should be slaughtered on my watch. I might despise the police and bash their actions and inactions. I also claim to want to privatize policing to make things better, so I had to do something. But what? I gave the boxes containing Knox's possessions another look. I couldn't carry out all 3 boxes without someone noticing, and I definitely didn't want Eric Beaufort or his unknown accomplices spotting me. Knox only really wanted the ring. I could return that and tip off the authorities about the rest of it. Knox would eventually get the rest of his collection back. It would just take time. Deciding that was the safest play, I headed for the door, but another thought struck me. Was the storage unit under surveillance? If I had this kind of hardware and contraband hidden away, I'd keep an eye on it. Damn it! As quickly and as carefully as possible, I scanned the room. I didn't see anything obvious, but pinhole cameras were hard to detect, and that was just the tip of the iceberg. It'd be best to get out of here as quickly as possible. With nothing but the championship ring in my hand, I left the unit unlocked and the door open. When I made my way back to my car, I put my mask, coat, and tools in the hidden compartment beneath my spare tire. Then I called Officer Gallo using a burner phone I'd taken from the office and gave him the address and unit number. "You need to send officers to check it out. I saw a man lugging crates of guns inside." "Who is this?" Gallo asked. "That doesn't matter. How'd you get this number?" "Just get your ass to the storage facility." "Not until you tell me why I should believe you." "I'm a friend." "A friend, huh?" He sounded skeptical. "What else did you see, besides guys toting in crates of guns?" "A bunch of stolen stuff from open cases. You need to get down there ASAP. They could move it out at any moment." I hung up, pulled out of the garage, and found a better vantage point. 20 minutes later, a patrol car arrived on the scene. I'd given Gallo the code for the gate, and the cruiser pulled through. Legally, I wondered if that was allowed. A few minutes later, more cruisers arrived. They remained outside. An unmarked pulled up, followed by another one. An evidence collection van arrived an hour later. Satisfied that I'd done my part, I headed across town to Knox's house. He answered the door, still dressed for work despite the late hour. "The police have found your collection. You'll be hearing from them soon. They should have recovered most of it. I didn't take an inventory, so I can't be sure everything was there. Some of the pieces might have been sold off." "Okay." Knox raised an eyebrow. "How did they find my stuff? And why did they call you at the news?" "That's not exactly what happened." I took the ring out of my pocket. "Here. They might have questions for you. You can tell them whatever you want, but I'd suggest you leave me out of this. Their case should be solid, even with this piece of missing evidence. Just don't make any false insurance claims. That's not the business I'm in, and I wouldn't appreciate you using my services for that. Do I make myself clear?" "I would never." "Good." I took a step back. "Our business is concluded. Your bill's in the mail." I was halfway to my car when Knox called out, "Thanks." Assisting the police left a bad taste in my mouth, but it had to be done. At least I could wash my hands of Trey Knox. He probably wasn't a bad man, but his story never sat right with me. I probably should have passed on the case, but I didn't. Next time I'd know better. I spent most of the next day conducting interviews. By the time night had fallen, I was ready to relax. Before I left, I stuck a stamp on Knox's invoice and dropped it in the mailbox. Now I was free. But the itchy feeling didn't go away. If anything, it grew stronger. After checking the time, I headed to KC's. As usual, the cop bar was crowded with regulars. I ordered a beer and spun around on the stool to survey the room. "Now what are you doing here?" Jim asked as he wiped the bar behind me. He'd missed my entrance, and I had hoped he wasn't working tonight. "Getting drunk. Or trying to." "Based on the condensation on that glass, you're not doing it right. Turn around, drink, order another, and drink that. We'll keep going until you can't stand up straight, then I'll take your keys and toss you into a cab. Doesn't that sound like fun?" "Not particularly." I glanced over my shoulder at him. "You planning on getting handsy when you toss me in the cab? That might be fun."
"I should wash your mouth out with soap."
"Will that get rid of the taste of this cheap beer?"
"You don't like it, go somewhere else. Anywhere else."
Jim's eyes twinkled. He enjoyed the ribbing and argument, even if I wasn't entirely sure either of us was kidding. "In a sec. I'm waiting for someone."
"Who?"
"Joe Gallo." Jim narrowed his eyes as he scanned the smoky room.
"He's not here."
He looked at the clock on the wall over our heads.
"Give him an hour."
"Okay." I turned back around and sipped my beer. Jim continued to refill drinks and wipe down the bar, all while eyeing me.
"This is just pathetic. I can't let you sit here looking like that."
He sighed dramatically.
"The least you could have done is dress down. T-shirt and jeans. None of this fancy suit shit. Someone's going to think the IRS is auditing me."
"They don't dress this nicely."
"My point exactly. They'll probably think you're trying to sell me insurance."
I took another sip of beer. "Deal with it." Jim muttered to himself and pulled out a worn deck of cards and a bowl of pretzels.
"You still play poker?"
"Not as much as I used to. My weekly game kicked me out."
"It must have been your personality."
He shuffled the cards.
"How about gin?"
"Is that supposed to be funny?" He snorted and dealt the cards.
"Why do you want to talk to Gallo?"
"I just wanted to see if he had a breakthrough on the case. A client hired me because his house was burglarized. Gallo was first on scene." Jim didn't offer any snide remarks or comments, which meant he might have heard the other cops talking about last night's bust. He picked a card and discarded. I grabbed the ace of spades and put down a three of clubs.
"What are we playing for?"
Jim asked. "How about rounds?"
"Fine. You win, you drink for free. You lose, you pay double. I don't drink on the job."
"That would make one of us." He laughed.
"It's probably a good thing you're not a cop."
"You know what? You're probably right." I toasted in his direction and took another sip. 3 beers later, Gallo showed up. I finished the hand and told Jim to let Gallo drink on my tab.
"You bribing an officer?"
Gallo asked. "Nope." I waited for him to settle on the stool beside me. "I just wondered if you'd made any progress on Knox's case."
"In fact, an anonymous tip came in late last night."
He glanced at me.
"But I'm sure you don't know anything about that."
"If I did, why would I waste my breath asking you about it?" Gallo shrugged.
"From what I heard, most of Knox's collection was recovered. It's being held as evidence for the time being. Several other stolen items were also recovered in the same location, as well as contraband. The detectives are still working on narrowing down the leads."
"Where was this found?" I asked.
"A storage unit. Damnedest thing, really."
"Was anyone arrested?"
"Not yet. The person who rented out the unit used a fake name and ID. We spoke to the facility's management. They don't recall much, or they're just not talking. But that's not my problem. I'm not in charge of investigations. That's above my pay grade."
He turned to me.
"Why the sudden interest?"
"I just wanted to make sure Knox was squared away. I've grown tired of his case."
"I bet your clients love to hear that."
"You've met Knox. What do you think of him?" Gallo gave me a funny look.
"Nothing indicates he's involved in whatever's going on inside that storage unit, if that's what you're asking."
It wasn't, but it might have been. I just wanted to make sure the city's finest have everything under control before I get back to private security matters.
"We got it."
"Great." I tapped the bar to get Jim's attention.
"Night." "Don't come back," Jim warned.
I smiled. "I won't." Chapter 24. After I left KC's, I went to a club. I was no stranger to partying all night and working all day. I hadn't in a while, but maybe that's what I needed. something to distract me from the whispers in my ear. Olympus was loud and crowded. I ordered bottle service for a table and honed in on a group of attractive women on the dance floor. Eventually, they felt my stare. I smiled. The leggy blonde smiled back. She turned to her two girlfriends, jerked her head in my direction, and the three of them laughed. Fish in a barrel. I poured a shot of vodka into my glass, raised it in their direction, and swallowed it down. 2 minutes later, the three of them had clustered around the cushioned semicircle of a couch.
"Do you mind if we join you?"
the blonde asked. Not at all. I sunk back into the seat and nodded at the shot glasses and vodka. Help yourselves.
"I'm Candace," the blonde said.
She picked up a shot glass, teetering on her spike heels as she brushed against my leg and practically sat on top of my thigh.
"That's Helena and Barbie," she indicated the other two women.
Barbie? Really?
"Barbara," the brunette glared at Candace. "Candy's just being a bitch."
I'm Lucien, I said. We made small talk, which consisted of shouting pointless things to one another while we drank. When the bottle was empty, they dragged me onto the dance floor. Someone else caught Helena's eye, but Barbara and Candace didn't mind using me as the meat in their sandwich. I didn't mind either.
"Do you want to get out of here?" Candace asked, her eyes and hands making her intentions obvious, while Barbara blew in my ear. "We could go back to your place."
If it hadn't been for the words, my place, I would have said yes. How about somewhere else? My place is a mess.
"I'm sure it's fine,"
Barbara insisted. She turned my head to face her and kissed me, her fingers digging into my shoulders. My nerve endings lit up, the pain sobering me. Blinking, I pulled back. Sorry, ladies. I'm game for anywhere but there. Barbara and Candace exchanged a look. Hotel? I spotted a hotel key in Candace's hand. My sluggish thoughts snapped to attention. This wasn't random. I thought I'd zeroed in on them, but they might have zeroed in on me. Turning, I checked to see what happened to Helena, who was now dragging some guy by the collar out the side door. How much? I asked, hoping I'd get slapped for asking the question. It'd be easier to apologize than face the alternative.
"For all night with the both of us?"
Barbara asked. Jesus. I rubbed a hand down my face and took a step away from them, needing some distance. I should have realized from their sparkly mini-dresses what this was, but in places like this, it was hard to tell sex workers from working women.
"I'm sure you can afford it."
Candace's eyes had dropped to my watch. Sorry for the confusion, ladies, but I'm not interested.
"Are you sure?"
Candace ran her hand along the front of my slacks.
"From what I can tell, you seem very interested."
Good night, ladies. I stepped away with the undeniable urge to gargle with something 100 proof. When did I become such a prude? I never would have reacted like this before, though I'd also vowed never to pay for sex, even when the rest of the guys in the office paid through the nose for their preferred stripper to take a more hands-on approach. But I never crossed that line for tons of reasons, some of which actually involved morals and ethics, so this made no sense. Twice in the last 2 weeks, I'd been propositioned by hookers. What the hell was wrong with me? Was I exuding desperation and loneliness after Jade's departure? Could they smell it on me? Cringing at the notion, I left the club and took a cab home. The next day, I told Justin the story, hoping he'd have some insight to offer. Instead, he enjoyed quite the laugh at my expense. But the hookers just made me edgier. The nagging itch in my brain continued to grow. Maybe I was seeing patterns that didn't exist. The first time, the police had been in the midst of a sting operation. Perhaps the same thing happened last night. After all, Danny Foster had been close friends with a cop. I bet he knew plenty more cops. Since Foster was willing to stalk Jade, why wouldn't the police want to arrest me on some humiliating charges? Getting the story of my arrest blasted across the front of the paper would hurt my business. That could be just the kind of revenge they wanted, since the settlement made me otherwise untouchable. So the next night I went to a different club. A few women talked to me, but no one offered to service me or take me home. That should have been a win, but it made me feel as if I was off my game. It also made me wonder if I actually wanted a companion for the evening. The thought held some appeal, but not as much as it should. Perhaps I was a little heartbroken.
"Did you run into any more sex workers last night?"
Justin asked the next day. No.
"I'm sorry?" he shrugged. "I'm not sorry? I don't know. What kinds of places do you go to drink that you run into these ladies of the night?
Mostly high-end bars and clubs.
Shouldn't the management keep them out?
How many politicians, businessmen, and celebrities make the news because they had sex with professionals?
A lot. Is that how you plan to compete in the big leagues?
No. I found the conversation vexing. My point is, establishments that cater to those individuals allow them to entertain plenty of vices.
That sounds risky.
It is.
Should I worry what kinds of vices our clients hire you to cover up?
We're not fixers. That's not our business.
Seems like a fine line.
We'll see. I shook my head. So what's on the agenda for today?
You have a couple of calls on the schedule. You also have a meeting with Unbreakable, that security equipment firm that wants to woo you. You're supposed to be meeting one of their reps for lunch.
That's right.
They're sending a car for you. Do you think they'll hire hookers?
You're not funny. But it is a nice change of pace, being wooed instead of doing the wooing. If nothing else, I might pick up a few tips on signing clients.
Oh, and King Realty called. They found a few properties that might be of interest.
See if they can show them to me after work today. Our days are too busy. Justin reached for the phone.
I'll do my best.
The phone calls I had to make didn't take long. Corporate clients wanted progress reports and explanations on the work I'd already done and the changes and suggestions I'd made. When that was finished, I read my email. King Realty had sent me photos and estimated costs for a few of the properties in question. I made a list of the priority locations, figuring my time was valuable. Tapping the intercom button, I leaned closer to the speaker. Justin, what did King Realty say?
Guinevere Harris wants to take you to see the properties after 5 tonight. She's one of the junior real estate agents they assigned to you.
Guinevere?
Yeah, boss. Is that a problem?
Nope. While I grabbed my tablet and a portfolio of projections that I'd need for my lunch meeting, I wondered if Guinevere was her real name. It fit perfectly with King Arthur and his knights, which would be a great gimmick for King Realty. Where am I meeting her?
She said she'd meet you here,
Justin said as I stepped out of my office.
Seriously, Lucien.
He rolled his eyes and let out a disgruntled grunt.
You make me talk to you over the damn intercom, and you aren't even in your office to hear my response.
But I still heard you.
Which is the entire reason why I don't think we need an intercom.
I clapped him on the back and headed for the door. Gloria, see if you can explain the system to him while I'm out. She looked up from her spot.
Mr. Cross enjoys irritating you. The intercom is the best way to do it.
See? I winked at Justin. She gets it. Why don't you?
Ugh.
He glared at me and went back to work. A chauffeured black SUV sat in front of the building. Hesitantly, I approached. The driver got out, asked if I was Lucien Cross, and opened the door. I slid into the back, surprised to find a woman waiting for me. Thankfully, she wasn't a hooker. Hi, Mr. Cross, I'm Danny Heller. She held out her hand, and we shook. She had a firm grip and looked me in the eye. Her business suit was professional but feminine. She wore a black skirt with a modest slit in the side that I noticed when she crossed her legs.
I represent Unbreakable. We specialize in security equipment and systems.
I'm aware.
Wonderful.
She nodded to the driver, and we pulled into traffic.
Let me be blunt. Cross-security and investigations has caught our attention. I realize you install systems and customize upgrades. May I ask if you have a supplier?
A few. I knew this game. Unbreakable wanted to offer me a partnership of sorts. I'd install their systems and use their products, and for my trouble, I'd receive compensation. I'm not entirely knowledgeable on your specs or what you're offering.
We'll get to that.
She kept her eyes on me.
But before I launch into the whole song and dance, will you tell me if I should save my breath? I believe working together would be beneficial for both of us, but I'm perfectly happy writing this meeting off and enjoying a fabulous lunch with a brilliant man. Either way, I win.
I conducted business in a similar fashion, and I appreciated the tactic. Compliments always helped in negotiations. I'm open to the possibility of a partnership, but I want to know how Unbreakable envisions this going. I won't put my name or reputation on something I'm not 100% sure about. She reached into the leather bag at her feet and pulled out a binder and handed it to me.
I find it's easier to have hard copies and printouts available. It makes it easier to flip back and forth and make notes.
While I skimmed the tabs of the binder, she tapped on her phone.
I also emailed you the same information in case you prefer it that way.
I flipped the pages, eyeing the sensors, cameras, locks, and mechanisms Unbreakable produced. Let's talk numbers. That's music to my ears. The ride to the restaurant flew by, and we spent hours inside, going over projected costs, what Cross Security would gain out of it, and the role Unbreakable would play. I wasn't willing to sign on the dotted line until I personally vetted every piece of equipment I planned to use, but if the specs and tests proved accurate, I didn't see any reason why I couldn't use Unbreakable as a supplier when suggesting physical upgrades to my clients' corporate security systems. Unbreakable had everything, from motion sensors to cameras to biometric scanners. With my knowledge, know-how, and the right software to operate the system, I could make a building more secure than Fort Knox. Miss Heller paid the tab and gave me a ride back to my office. Let's schedule a follow-up meeting. My boss will want to speak to you directly. I'm sure he'll be able to answer all those questions that I couldn't. That was an embellishment. Heller had answers for almost everything, except how much my cut would be, or how much of a deduction they'd take off the price that I'd make up for when charging my clients. I also wanted to know if they'd reciprocate our relationship by suggesting my firm conduct the security assessments and overhauls to their existing client base. How is Tuesday at 10? Pulling out my phone, I checked the calendar. I'm busy at 10. Not a problem. She tapped on her screen. 1? Can you make it 1:30? Absolutely. She marked it on the calendar. I'll send a car to pick you up. That's okay. I have another meeting that day. Will it be at your headquarters? Yes. She hit a few more keys and my phone chimed. I sent you the address and details. Is there anything else I can do for you, Mr. Cross? She uncrossed her legs and crossed them the other way. No, this looks promising. I hope our next meeting will be just as productive. She hit another few buttons and my phone chimed again. That's my private line, in case you think of anything else you might need. Thanks. I stepped out of the car. Sex appeal sells. I knew this. It's why plenty of pharmaceutical reps were attractive young men and women. It's also why Pan Am and other airlines had such rigid standards back in the day. I'd hoped we'd made progress since then as a society, but I wasn't sure we had. But, since I was on the beneficial side of things and rather enjoyed the potential perks that came with it, I didn't want to complain, which probably meant I hadn't evolved much from the Neanderthal days. No wonder I'd been arrested for practically clubbing someone to death. While musing on the lack of societal and personal evolution and contemplating the overlap of the sex industry with every other industry, I went inside and took the elevator up to the proper floor. When I got into the office, Guinevere Harris was waiting for me. I hadn't realized my lunch had lasted 5 hours. I'm sorry to keep you waiting, I said to the woman. I'll be right with you. I just need 10 minutes. I opened my office door. Justin, can I see you in private? My assistant stepped into the office, closing the door behind him. I gave him the binder and updated him on the situation. I'll review everything myself to make sure the hardware is sound, but let's have a third party conduct a test to make sure we aren't getting into bed with a company that has unreliable or unprogrammable hardware. I'm on it. Anything else? Just make the call and go home. Hey, Lucien, don't forget, I want my own office. Prioritize that when you view these new properties. Chapter 25. What are your long-term plans, Mr. Cross? Guinevere, or Winnie as I was told to call her, asked. Please, call me Lucien. It seemed only fair. Honestly, the sky's the limit. She whistled, a smile on her face. How often do you plan to upgrade your office suite? I'd like that to be a one and done if at all possible. Frankly, I don't know what I'll need aside from the list I already gave you. You need room to expand. Are you sure you don't want to buy your own building? Unfortunately, that's not in my price range. Cross Security is still in its infancy. You could buy an office building and rent out the other floors. It's a nice side hustle. I hadn't considered that until now. Despite the dollar signs dancing in front of my eyeballs, I knew it'd be a bigger headache than it was worth. That would make me responsible to all the tenants. I'd have to provide building security, deal with plumbing, and the window washers. The list could go on forever. I'm not ready to tackle that just yet. Not a problem. She parked in the garage beneath a 40-story office building that was still undergoing the final stages of construction. As you can see, parking is available for you and all your employees. Several floors are currently available. She rattled off the square footage. The contractors can create whatever you want, offices, conference rooms, etc. The floors are available for purchase, not just rent?
The space is available for purchase. However much you need would be carved out. It's also available for rent, but you made it clear you didn't want to risk losing your office space or come under pressure with rent increases.
She cocked her head at me as we waited for the elevator.
Although, you don't seem to want to deal with plumbing issues either. Owning makes you responsible. The building super won't fix it for you.
I know that. I also didn't want any unauthorized personnel snooping through sensitive materials. We toured the building. Several of the lower levels had already been filled with accountants, investment bankers, and lawyers. This would be a professional building with professionals working inside. These were the types of people I wouldn't mind my clients bumping to in the elevator. Winnie arranged for an architect and contractor to meet with us, and I went over the lab specifications with them. They promised they could do it. Everything was feasible. I'd want a training area, gym, and other equipment. I didn't know if I could have a shooting range in this building, but it wasn't beyond the realm of possibility. Nothing was. When we left, I felt good about the location. Let's make an offer. I'll need at least 3 floors. That should give me enough room to expand. Worst case, I could buy out my neighbors above or below. Who knows? There might be a point where the entire building would become cross-security. The thought made me giddy. She tried to hold back the smile, but she was just as excited as I was. We went back to my office to discuss matters in private, and I ordered dinner for us to celebrate. After deciding on a reasonable offer, Winnie went back to King Realty to get started on the paperwork, and I called Almeida to warn him we might have upcoming real estate issues to address.
"Congrats, Cross,"
he said. "Thanks.
"I'm taking you out to celebrate."
You?
"Yeah, why not? Aren't we friends?"
I'm not sure. Would you hang out with me if I didn't pay your retainer?"
"Good point."
Almeida laughed.
"But you do, so we are. I'll pick you up in 15 minutes.
Almeida took me to a private club he'd recently discovered. The main area was like a non-stop rave, with strobing lights and pulsing tones. I glanced at Almeida, never expecting my attorney to have much of a life, let alone one this crazy. He caught my eye and gestured with his hand. I followed him to the bar. He leaned over, speaking to the bartender. A moment later, a door beside the bar unlocked, and Almeida pulled it open. I followed him inside. Once the door closed, the room was nearly soundproofed. I could barely hear the rumble of the music. What is this place?
"It's great, isn't it?"
He took a seat in one of the chairs and reached for the humidor.
"A lawyer from my firm turned me on to this place. I don't know how he found it, but I suspect a client recommended it."
Everything was leather and mahogany. No wonder lawyers liked this place. It looked like most law offices I'd seen. They had an array of cigars, large humidors, and expensive liquors. Scotch, whiskey, bourbon, brandy. The golden hues blended in nicely with the rest of the decor. The room smelled like fine spirits, good cigars, and leather. I took a seat across from him. A moment later, a waitress came through the door with an order pad. The service was excellent. This was the perfect place to make deals, meet clients, or think. Closing my eyes, I let my head rest against the backrest. I couldn't remember the last time I wasn't doing something productive. Even in my sleep, I suspected I was making lists and perfecting client pitches.
"Has business picked up?"
he asked. Somewhat.
"I figured it'd be booming with all those new hires."
I'll need them. And just like that, my mind was back on work. Something was bothering me. I just couldn't figure out what. Maybe that's why I'd been going out most nights. Okay, every night. Well, that and Jade told me I had to move on, so I wanted to tell her I'd made an honest attempt. That might make her more willing to accept that we could be together. No strings. Every once in a while. A trip here, a vacation there. It wouldn't be bad. And during the interim, we could date around and live our lives. It was the only solution I could see to our dilemma, aside from never seeing one another again, which I didn't want to think about.
"Lucien,"
Almeida puffed on his cigar.
"are you having that, oh shit, I just made an offer on 3 floors of a brand new office building moment?"
No, smartass. I told him about my recent encounter with the prostitutes and the run-in I had with Danny Foster.
"It could be the police keeping tabs. Foster didn't press charges, but since he and Sergeant Renwin were so close, they might have other friends in common."
Yeah, other cop friends.
"What does Foster do?"
He works construction.
"Before that?"
He was a paramedic, and before that, active military.
"So, he was a first responder. That's probably how he and Renwin became acquainted."
Almeida let out a sigh and reached for his snifter of brandy.
The police can't go near you for anything related to Renwyn per the terms of the settlement. That didn't necessarily encompass Jade or your involvement with her, but they wouldn't want to risk muddying the waters by bringing you in on an assault or stalking charge that had to do with Jade.
He was the one stalking her, I growled.
I know, but if they could get you on something unrelated, even something minor, the less informed could use that as an opportunity to make their point or even make an example out of you. You need to be careful.
Is that your professional opinion?
Don't break the law, and don't give them any reason to arrest you.
He pointed at me.
That's my professional opinion.
Easier said than done, given my line of work. We crossed paths.
Avoid police cases, especially ones that could result in obstruction or tampering charges. No murder cases. Other than that, just pick and choose.
I need to pick my clients more carefully. The last one was a real pain in my ass.
I have clients like that.
The lawyer grinned at me. Zip it. I don't lie to you.
Sometimes I wish you would.
Let me know when I should.
I'll try to remember that.
He finished his brandy and cigar.
Okay, I'm calling it a night. You coming? We can split a cab.
Not yet.
Suit yourself.
After he left, I went back into the main room of the club and sat at the bar. The bartender brought me a gin and tonic, and I watched the reflection of the strobing lights in the glass. I didn't see any security, but no one seemed interested in starting a fight or getting into an altercation. The club was private, but from the line out the door when we arrived, I wasn't sure just how exclusive it was. Hey, I said to the bartender, how does one go about becoming a member? Member? He looked confused. Oh, you mean access to the private rooms and all that? He reached beneath the bar and pulled out a clipboard. Just fill this out. We need to keep a credit card on file to run your tab, and that's about it. How much for the room? Planning a bachelor party or corporate event? No, maybe just some quiet time. The bartender laughed. We have several private areas available. For parties, we normally need advance notice. For intimate meetings, we'll add the charge to your tab. It requires bottle service, that's about it. Nice. Although from the aged spirits on display and the bar's marked-up prices, bottle service would run a few hundred easy. Good thing I had the money, because this seemed like the perfect place to unwind. Chapter 26. I'd been showing up at the club regularly. I'd drink, flirt a little, and ignore the warning voice in the back of my head. The cops weren't allowed in private venues like this, not without being invited in by the management, and I didn't see that happening. So I should have nothing to worry about. The usual? The bartender asked when I took a seat in the corner. Sure. He filled a glass and placed it on a napkin in front of me. The woman I'd been flirting with for the last week and a half spotted me and came over. She eased onto the stool beside mine.
Come here often, stranger?
It sure feels like it.
I know what you mean. I like the vibe. Chill, laid back, no one pawing at me or fights breaking out.
She picked up her martini and took a sip.
But it's far from quiet. I don't like boring.
Who does? She spun on the stool to study me.
You never told me what you do for a living. Let me guess. International spy.
You got me, I chuckled, picking up my own glass. I'm guessing only a spy would recognize another spy.
Oh no, you figured me out.
She put her hand on my forearm and leaned in closer.
Are you my contact?
The bird flies at midnight. It was stupid, but it kept her entertained. She laughed in delight.
The morning sun knows no flame.
What?
I don't know. Isn't that a spy-like thing to say?
It is.
Good.
She sat up straight and fidgeted with her napkin. We'd had exchanges like these several times in the last 10 days. I always spotted her when she came in around 8:30. She'd grab a drink from the bar, wander toward one of the high-top tables, finish her drink, and dance. It never mattered if she was alone or with a couple of friends. She always found partners to dance with. After almost an hour, she'd wander back to the bar, take a seat, and talk to me. I liked our routine.
Are you ever going to ask me to dance?
She inquired. I don't dance.
Liar. I've seen you out there.
She finished her drink, and I gestured to the bartender to bring us each another. The second always went on my tab.
Men don't come to clubs to drink alone at the bar.
They come to dance, to meet people.
I met you.
You don't even know my name.
We're spies. We don't exchange names.
That's right. I almost forgot.
She picked up the fresh martini.
So aside from whatever spy game you might be playing, why do you come here every night if you don't want to dance?
I like to watch.
Oh,
not like that.
Sure, she teased. Whatever you say, Mr. Mystery Man.
Screw it. Do you want to grab a drink somewhere a little quieter and we can get to know one another better?
That has to be the worst pickup line I've ever heard.
It's not a line. I jerked my head toward the thick door just to the side, indicating the private room. If you decide I'm a jerk, you can walk right out and your night isn't ruined. What do you say?
Give me an hour on the dance floor first.
Go ahead. I'll be here. She tugged on my hand.
No, silly. You're going to dance with me, and the private room is my treat.
After we were hot, sweaty, and a little out of breath, she dragged me across the club. She nodded to a different bartender, one I didn't recall seeing before, and he tossed her a key to a different private room. Obviously, I wasn't the only regular around here. She unlocked the door and tugged on the handle. The heavy door opened, and she pulled me inside. The door hadn't even fully shut when she kissed me.
"What's that?"
she asked. Her hands had found their way beneath my jacket to the bulge behind my back.
"Shouldn't the hard thing be in front?"
For the first time since we started talking, I noticed she had a slight accent. She reached for my gun, but I caught her hand. "Hardware." I took it out and placed it on one of the tables. "For the spy trade." The gun didn't freak her out, which it probably should have.
"Are you really a spy?"
"No, I'm a security consultant."
"What does that mean?"
"I work private security."
"Like a bodyguard?"
"A little higher up the chain than that."
"It sounds dangerous."
"Sometimes." She grinned.
"I can be dangerous too."
She pushed me down onto a leather couch and straddled me. Her lips found mine, and whatever thoughts about what was happening trickled out of my mind. The rear door opened, and she crawled off my lap. A cruel laugh left her lips.
"You were right. He had no idea."
"Excellent,"
a man with a thick Russian accent said.
"You did well."
"That makes us even, no?"
she asked, the accent even more pronounced now.
"Almost."
He reached into his pocket.
"Let me give you what you are owed."
Despite the thick tapestries and plush furnishings, the gunshot boomed in the enclosed room. I scrambled off the couch, but it was already too late. She was dead.
"Don't be stupid,"
the Russian warned, aiming at me. Blood and tissue dripped from my once white shirt. I took a step back, hands raised. "Who the hell are you?" I stared down at her body, horrified. "Why would you do that?" My eyes burned. A suffocating cloud of gunpowder had replaced the pungent haze of cigar smoke and fine spirits. I inched toward the table where I'd placed my 9mm. If only I could reach it.
"I wouldn't recommend it."
The Russian towed the woman's body out of the way, clearing a path to the oversized leather armchair, which squeaked in protest under his massive frame. "What would you recommend? I'd suggest Jenny Craig." "Not the time, Cross," my internal voice warned.
"Do you think that's funny?"
he asked. A little, but nothing was funny. I wanted to kill him. "Who are you?"
"Vasily Petrov."
His face meant nothing, but his name did. He was a Russian gangster. The Russian gangster. Vasily reached into the box for a cigar. He put his gun down and trimmed the tip of the Cuban.
"Have you ever seen what one of these can do to loosen a man's lips?"
He held up the single-blade guillotine, a wicked grin on his face. "Can't say that I have," nor did I want to. I had to escape, but Vasily had brought 2 of his enforcers along for the ride. They blocked the only exits. I needed a weapon, but getting my hands on one would be tough, and taking out all 3 Russians without getting my brains splattered against the wall would be damn near impossible. I couldn't count on help to arrive. The back room of the club was private, soundproofed, but even if it wasn't, the pounding beats beyond the door would easily drown out weapons fire. No one would interfere, except maybe the waitstaff, and they'd end up gunned down in the process. I couldn't let that happen. Why had I been so stupid to ignore the nagging itch that told me something was wrong? How did I end up in this nightmare? None of this made sense. What was going on? Why was Vasily after me? Stray thoughts entered and left my mind as my synapses misfired. I'd made a mistake somewhere along the line. But where? He smiled, knowing he could take his time. He didn't have to worry about the noise, which was exactly what he wanted. He examined the end of his cigar, put the cutter down, and struck a match. He rotated the Cuban, puffing slowly until the end glowed red.
"Have a seat so we can discuss your options, Mr. Cross."
What options? This wasn't a discussion. It was an execution, possibly a double execution. I thought back, trying to clear my mind. What had I done to piss him off? Suddenly, a single possibility came to mind. Shit. You should have called my office and made an appointment. My gaze drifted to the dead woman. I didn't even know her name. Guilt and sadness flooded over me, but I held my emotions at bay. There would be time to mourn later, if there was a later. You could have saved on the dramatics and bloodshed. We're both businessmen. We should behave as such. Killing was unnecessary. Ruthless. Rage boiled inside of me. Could I take him out before he killed me? The two enforcers standing at either end of the room made me think otherwise.
"I wanted you to understand how serious this is, and the peril you face."
He jerked his chin at the couch.
"Sit."
I stared into the woman's lifeless eyes and silently vowed Vasily would pay for this. What do you want from me?
"Cross Security interfered with one of my shipments and turned it over to the police. You have 24 hours to get it back."
That's not possible.
"You will make it possible, or unfortunate things will befall you and everyone you know."
Vasily flicked the ashes of his cigar, letting them fall onto the dead woman's thigh. He lifted my gun off the table, aimed, and fired a few rounds into her body. Then he unloaded the weapon and tossed it to me.
"In case you were thinking of calling the police, don't. Unless you want to explain why you shot and killed Svetlana."
I noticed the gloves on his hands. He had come prepared. He set this up. He even knew her name. "She was one of yours," I said, the realization coming too late. "Why did you kill her?"
"She stole from me. People shouldn't take what doesn't belong to them. I thought you could use the object lesson. Right, comrade?"
"I'm not your comrade."
"Fine. Have it your way, Mr. Cross. All that matters is that you return my shipment. If not, I will destroy you, piece by piece."
He puffed on the cigar. "You should kill me now."
"Who said anything about killing you? I need you alive. Dead men aren't good at following instructions."
His gaze dropped to Svetlana.
"There are plenty of other ways to hurt you besides that. An anonymous call to the police for starters. They have an axe to grind, no? How about I give them evidence of a homicide?"
You can't seriously believe you'll get away with this. Scanning the room, I memorized the details in case I had to prove my innocence. But the facts were against me.
"Get away with what? That's your gun. Those are your bullets in her body. You're the murderer. No one will believe otherwise. Now retrieve what belongs to me. Meet me at Pier 19 at this time tomorrow. Don't be late."
The big Russian nodded to his men, and they yanked me off the couch, dragged me to the door, and tossed me into the crowded club. I stumbled backward, pinwheeling my arms to regain my balance. I didn't go down. Instead, I knocked into several people on the dance floor. A couple turned to give me the evil eye. The annoyance on their faces quickly morphed into revulsion and fear at the sight of the dripping blood. "It's okay," I said, even though it wasn't. I had to get out of here before Vasily opened fire on a few innocent bystanders, or one of them decided to report me to the police. Ducking away from them, I removed my bloodied shirt and wrapped it around my unloaded weapon before tucking the bundle against my stomach and hurrying to the exit. Leaving the scene of a crime wasn't advisable, but I didn't think I had a choice. Vasily wouldn't call the cops, not yet, but the gangster had gone to a lot of trouble to make sure I wouldn't either. He had a plan. For all I knew, everyone and everything was part of it. From Svetlana spotting me to the unknown bartender who tossed her the key. It had been a setup from the start. A slow burn. How far did it go back? Was Almeida involved? No, that wasn't possible. He was my lawyer. We'd been through hell. But someone introduced him to the club. A coworker's client. Which one? And how far down the rabbit hole did this go? When did it start? What about the prostitutes who'd approached me in the other clubs? Had they been on Vasily's payroll too? I didn't know what to think. All I knew was I had to get out of here. As I pushed my way out the front door, I cautioned one final look behind me. Thankfully, the couple I'd bumped into seemed to have forgotten all about me and had gone back to dancing and drinking. That bought me some time, but Vasily had put me on a clock. Setting a timer on my phone, I slid into a waiting cab and gave the driver my office address. Then, I dialed the only person I truly trusted. "Justin, I need you back at work. We have a problem." I didn't wait for a reply before hanging up. The specks of blood and fluid clinging to my undershirt distracted me from proper phone etiquette. I picked at a piece of brain matter as a wave of nausea rolled through me. "Don't get sick." I swallowed down the bile and let my forehead rest against the cold window. "You'll figure it out. It'll be okay." "Long night?" the cabbie asked, curious as to why I was mumbling to myself. "You could say that." I shook out the tremors in my hands. The cabbie alternated his gaze from the road to the rearview mirror. "You feeling okay, buddy? If you gotta hurl, let me know so I can pull over." "I'm fine." I forced my thoughts away from the sticky dampness I held in my lap. For the rest of the ride, I contemplated calling the police. But Vasily was right. They did have an axe to grind, and given the evidence, I doubted they'd believe me. Thoughts of exactly what linked me to that club ran through my mind. Credit card receipts and my nightly chats with Svetlana had worked against me. The cops would think I'd made a move, she refused my advances, and things went south. That's what I'd assume. What about security footage? I couldn't remember where the security cameras were hidden in the club, but it could exonerate me. It'd prove Vasily entered the private room and shot Svetlana. I had to find out if such footage existed. I wasn't sure if I'd be able to clear my name otherwise, and even that might not be enough. "Who owns the club?" The driver asked, eyeing me through the rearview mirror. "Nothing." The taxi came to a stop. "Here we are." I tossed the money into the front seat and stepped out of the cab. So many thoughts cascaded through my mind, I had to focus on one thing at a time. The problem was, I didn't know where to begin. After all, I'd never been framed for murder before. Chapter 27. Unlocking the door, I went straight to the bathroom and stripped down, desperate to wash her blood off my body. Was this destroying evidence? Would the police think I'd done this intentionally to conceal my crime? Flashes came as I showered. This time, I couldn't contain the bile that burned the back of my throat. Gagging, I hoped this was a nightmare, that I'd wake up. But that didn't happen. Once I had my faculties in order, I rinsed my mouth and remained under the spray for a few minutes longer, compartmentalizing the facts. I had to pull it together and get to work. I dried off and dressed from the waist down, then I shoved my bloody clothes into a zippered plastic bag and wiped my prints off the gun. That wouldn't solve anything. The weapon was registered to me, but it might slow down the police, should they come knocking. I washed my hands again, trying to recall everything I knew about gunshot residue.
"Lucien?"
Justin tapped on the bathroom door.
"Are you okay?"
"I'm glad you're here. Find out what kind of security system Club Nova has. We have to gain access to their footage and monitor the police frequencies. Listen to any calls pertaining to a homicide, female victim, blonde, mid-20s.
"Right away."
I checked the countdown timer and turned to grab a fresh shirt, catching a glimpse of the Angel of Death tattoo in the mirror. I didn't get into this business to deal with death. Quite the opposite, actually. But death always found me. Thank goodness Jade was safe. I went into the outer office. "Justin, when you get a chance, get Almeida on the phone. It's about time my attorney answers a few questions."
"Yes, sir."
He glanced at the bag in my hand.
"Do you want to tell me what's going on?"
"No." I opened the top drawer in the cabinet. "Where's the Knox file?"
"Look under pending."
Got it. I took the folder and settled it behind my desk, scanning the contract we signed. Nothing in the research indicated Knox's case involved anything other than recovering stolen property. It should have been simple. So what went wrong? It had to be Knox's gambling that had led to all this. The hired muscle, Alexei Balakin, was Russian. Surely he worked for Vasily. That's the only way any of this fits together. The Russians must have stolen from Knox in order to make him pay his debt or to take his prized possessions as collateral. That would explain the professional break-in and the storage unit I found. But what if I was wrong? After turning on the computer, I poured a shot of bourbon, needing something to calm my nerves. My fingers flew over the keys. None of my other clients or cases had any connection to organized crime. It had to be Knox. How could I have missed his connection to a Russian gangster? Why hadn't I done a better job performing my due diligence? I knew the answer. I just wasn't ready to admit that I'd let Jade's visit derail me this much. The intercom beeped.
Lucien, Mr. Almeida's on line 1.
I grabbed the handset. Hello?
Do you have any idea what time it is?
Almeida asked. This is an emergency.
It better be. Tell me you're under arrest.
Not yet. I have to ask you about the club you took me to. How long have you been a member?
I'm not. Not really. I've been there a couple times. It's quiet.
Sure, I snorted. Who told you about it?
What's this about?
Answer the question.
Lucien, what happened?
I bit my lip. Almeida had been my attorney for years. He'd started out working contracts for me, but when I'd gotten into that scrape with my previous boss and the assault charges, he'd handled it. Just like he'd handled the settlement negotiations involving the fatal shooting of Sergeant Scott Renwin. I could trust him. If I couldn't, I'd already be dead. May we speak in hypotheticals?
I'm your lawyer. This conversation is privileged. You know that.
Hypothetically, I ignored his declaration, a man goes to a club, meets a beautiful woman, and takes her into the private back room to get to know her better.
I've heard this story before. Guy gets too rough, and the girl ends up dead. What does that have to do with you?
Different story, same ending. You left out the twist. The girl worked for a gangster who killed her to emphasize his point. And then he shot her 4 more times with the other man's gun.
Your gun,
Almeida surmised. So much for hypotheticals.
This happened inside Club Nova?
An hour ago.
Shit.
Does Vasily Petrov own the club?
I don't think so. I don't know. I never looked into it. I had no reason.
What do I do now?
You realize I'm a lawyer, right? Not a fixer?
Then bill me twice or find someone who can deal with this. You're the reason I was even there in the first place.
You're right. I'm sorry. Do the police know?
I peered into the outer office, but Justin hadn't notified me of any radio chatter. Not yet.
Where's her body?
I don't know. Probably still in the back room.
And your gun?
Here, along with my clothing.
Any physical evidence placing you at the scene?
Plenty.
How about your DNA on her body?
Things didn't progress that far.
All right, I can work with that. Fingerprints, fibers, we can explain those away. Bullets, not so much. Hopefully the ME can determine which shot proved fatal. Ballistics will identify 2 guns, indicative of 2 shooters. It won't exactly clear you, but it should take murder off the table. The DA would have a hell of a time getting a conviction under those conditions, but they might still try. Your history works against you.
I know. I sipped the bourbon, my focus divided between the conversation and the information on the screen. How do I proceed? Almeida weighed his words carefully.
As an officer of the court, I feel an obligation to tell you to trust in the law. You should report this to the police, turn everything over, and explain the situation. Things are likely to resolve in your favor.
That's bullshit and you know it.
You could go to your father. Tell him what happened, let him handle it.
No.
Christ, Lucien, he's the police commissioner. Let him help you.
Help me? He'd be the first in line to arrest me. What's option 3?
Life isn't always multiple choice, my friend.
Find me a third option. That's why I'm paying you. He mulled over the facts. Finally, he said,
The Russians wouldn't want the attention either. We're talking about the ones who operate out of Brighton Beach, right? Little Odessa? They have their own cleanup crew, or so I hear. Are you sure the cops will even find her body?
Maybe not. It depends on how willing I am to cooperate. Vasily has a gun to my head. I have to find a way to remove the bullets.
We're talking in metaphors, right?
Yes.
All right, good,
He exhaled.
Are you sure you have your gun? Maybe it was stolen.
Maybe. I knew what I had to do, but at this point it was probably too little too late.
That changes things. Make sure you report it missing first thing in the morning. The less evidence hanging around, the better off you'll be. An alibi might also come in handy in case her body surfaces. But it has to be airtight. Lies, if discovered, will only make you look guiltier. Are you sure the Russians will move her out of the club?
I'm not sure of anything. I don't even know how they got inside. I have to figure out if there's video footage and what it shows. After that, I'll figure out how to proceed. An image of Svetlana flashed behind my eyes. I should have realized she was a prostitute, but she didn't dress the part, and she certainly didn't approach me in typical fashion. Vasily must have coached her, planted her, and killed her.
Do you think your other recent run-ins with pros were his doing?
Possibly. I thought back to the SUV I thought had been tailing me. What if there had been two? Foster and someone else. Someone more sinister. I don't know anything right now.
Focus on damage control. We'll deal with the rest as it comes,
Almeida promised. But I couldn't do that. I had to be proactive. Waiting would get me killed or arrested. Vasily wanted his shipment back. I wasn't sure what that meant, but I didn't think he was referencing a bunch of stolen DVDs and laptops. He wanted the drugs and guns returned to him. And if I couldn't get them, all hell would break loose. The only problem was I had no idea what he'd do once he had what he wanted.
Lucien, are you still there?
The police won't find her body unless Vasily tells them where to look. I should be in the clear as long as I give him what he wants.
That sounds like wishful thinking.
Almeida hesitated.
What does he want?
It's best if you don't know.
Isn't it a little late for that?
Regardless, I won't be able to get him what he wants if I'm under arrest, so the police won't find her body. Not right away. He'll have to move her, but in case I'm wrong, I need you to hold on to a package for me for a few days. Let's call it an insurance policy.
I don't like the sound of that.
Neither do I, but you introduced me to the club. You owe me.
Fine. I know I can't talk you out of this, so I'll save my breath. Send the package to the office. Just make sure it's sealed and contains explicit instructions. Label it for my eyes only. The last thing either of us needs is a legal assistant opening it. Then we're both screwed. I don't want my license revoked because of this shit you've gotten involved in with the Russians.
Thanks.
And Lucien, try not to get yourself killed. I can't afford to lose your retainer and all the billable hours.
I snickered. I'm glad my life means so much to you.
Seriously, I am sorry.
Save it, I sighed. But for the record, so am I. After disconnecting, I stuffed my clothing and gun into a large bubble mailer, wrote detailed instructions and a personal account of what happened, and brought the package out to Justin's desk. Have the courier deliver this to Mr. Almeida. Make sure you use our regular guy. I don't trust anyone else.
No problem, boss.
Where are we on figuring out the club's security system?
Surveillance footage is stored on the cloud. We should be able to access it remotely, but I haven't had any luck getting past the firewall.
Let me do it. Even though I wasn't a hacker, I had been a computer science major and a decent programmer before shifting my knowledge of the tech industry into making money on Wall Street. That was before everything went to hell and I turned to private security. Oddly enough, that's when I made friends with a few elite hackers and picked up a couple of useful tricks. But I couldn't get anyone else involved in this, when the ramifications could prove fatal. Remind me we need to get a computer expert on the payroll sooner rather than later.
Have you thought about taking your checkbook into the FBI training facility? Offering an entire class of recruits a job in the private sector?
Justin asked. I have, but by then it's already too late. They're brainwashed, indoctrinated with all those oaths, rules, and regulations. I can't work with people like that. I don't want idealists, I want realists. Life isn't black and white. It's messy, just like this situation. I held my breath, waiting for the cursor to stop spinning. Bingo, I was in. Quickly, I scanned the database for the footage from an hour ago. Clicking on a video file, I watched the events play out on the screen. The club's back room didn't have cameras, but the main areas did. Plenty of footage had been captured of me with Svetlana, including our disappearance into the private room, and my reemergence a few minutes later covered in her blood.
Lucien, what happened in there?
You don't want to know. I backed up the footage, scanning the front door and main areas of the club for signs of Vasily or his enforcers. At certain points, the footage blacked out. Obviously, he had gotten to the cameras first and deleted anything damning. The back hallway, which waitstaff used to enter and leave the private rooms, didn't have any security cameras posted. I couldn't prove anything. Vasily had covered his tracks and painted me as the only possible suspect in Svetlana's murder. Come on, you bastard, where are you? I checked the current feed, but saw nothing but a blank screen. Vasily must have deactivated the cameras. He had to, in order to move her body to the service exit and conceal his involvement. Are the video files saved on the premises?
I don't believe so, Justin said. Everything goes straight to the cloud.
If I had more time, I'd do a full workup on Svetlana, if that was even her real name, and run backgrounds on every one of Club Nova's employees. But I didn't have that kind of time. That would have to wait until later. Right now I had to run interference, or damage control, as Almeida put it. Forcing the warning voice in my head to quiet, I pressed delete, replacing one fear with another. You didn't see that.
No, sir.
One problem solved. Plenty more to go. Get started on a business profile for Club Nova. I want to know everything about it, the owner, and every single person who's ever stepped foot inside.
How?
Find a way.
I'll do my best.
Thanks. Closing myself in my office, I called the members of the security detail who hadn't been assigned to guard Miranda. At this point, I only trusted the original hires. Everyone else would have to be reevaluated if I was still alive and walking around free. But that wasn't a priority. Having teams guard Justin and Gloria were. Chapter 28. When did you first notice it was missing? The cop asked. I don't know. It's not something I pay attention to. He looked up from the computer screen. Your best guess? From his tone, I knew he didn't approve of my answer. Admittedly, it was a terrible answer, but it was better to appear incompetent and reckless rather than guilty. I know I had it last week. He gave me a look. Where was it? In the glove box of my car? Do you keep your car locked? I shrugged. Does anyone else have access to your vehicle? He asked. No. Did you notice signs of a break-in? I sighed, as if these questions were nothing more than an irritation. I was a busy man who had a busy day ahead. Maybe. I noticed one of my windows was rolled down, but I didn't think that much of it at the time. Now I'm not so sure. All right. He hit print. I need you to sign this. Grabbing a pen from the cup on the counter, I signed the report, alleging the facts presented were true to the best of my knowledge. If Vasily called in the tip or Svetlana's body surfaced, the lie would be the least of my problems. Anything else? Yeah. He gave me his hardened cop stare. You have 2 other weapons registered to you? Keep an eye on them. Absolutely, officer. He scowled at me. We'll let you know if we find it, but if I were you, I wouldn't hold my breath. If we do find it, the circumstances won't be pleasant. Got it. I took my copy of the report, stuffed it in my pocket, and headed for the door. Before I made it out of the precinct, Sarah turned a corner in her freshly pressed sergeant's uniform. She just arrived for her shift, early as usual.
Lucien, what are you doing here? Is everything okay?
Fine.
Are you sure?
She took a step closer and peered into my eyes.
You don't look like you've slept.
I shrugged noncommittally.
Are you here to see Officer Gallo? I don't know if he's working. He could be getting off or coming on. Hang on.
She called to a rookie to find Gallo before I could even answer her question. I spoke to him last week. I don't need to see him again.
You sure?
Yes. A thought came to mind. What happened to all the evidence that got collected?
Oh, your client wants to know when he'll get his stuff back. Most of the boxes are being held in the evidence locker. Everything's been cataloged, but since it's an open case, well, you know how it works.
Gallo mentioned contraband, drugs, guns, other nasty stuff. Any idea who it might belong to?
No one's looking at Mr. Knox as the owner. Tell him not to worry.
Okay, I will. That didn't answer my question, but if I asked too many questions, Sarah would get suspicious, and I didn't want that. I'm on my way to see him now. I'll be sure to tell him the good news. I gave her a quick hug.
Take care.
She gave me an odd look.
Get some sleep.
No rest for the wicked. I continued past her, glad to get out of there before Gallo appeared. At least now I knew the evidence had been processed. That meant it was downtown in the off-site storage facility. That tidbit was crucial if I planned to meet Vasily's demands. I just wasn't sure breaking into a secure police facility and stealing evidence was the best way to deal with this situation. Unfortunately, it might be the only way. I had to figure out a better plan, any plan. At this point, I was open to suggestions, except there weren't many people I could ask. Once inside my car, I took a fresh burner phone out of the packaging, plugged the charger into the outlet, and called Freddie G. He didn't answer, but Freddie didn't exactly do mornings. The only reason he'd be awake now is if he hadn't gone to bed. Usually he'd answer if he thought the call was from a client. However, he wouldn't know this number, so he wouldn't bother picking up. I sent him a text. Answer your phone. Waited 10 seconds and called again. He still didn't pick up. If I wasn't on a time crunch, I would have paid him a visit, but I had to prioritize. As far as I knew, Freddie didn't cater to crime bosses. He stayed away from the questionable crowd as much as possible, so I didn't think Vasily had found me because of Freddie. Everything linked back to Trey Knox, or so I suspected. Putting the car in gear, I headed for Knox's neighborhood. It was early enough that I could catch him before he went to work. Today, I wasn't putting up with his petulance, accusations, and hollow threats. He was going to tell me who he owed and why men had broken into his house and stolen his stuff, or else he'd have a very bad day. Not as bad as mine, but close. I'd make sure of it. The gated community was difficult to enter without the proper credentials or standing invitation, and I didn't feel like trying to pay off the guards again, so I parked on a nearby street and found a coffee cart. Caffeine would keep me going, especially now that some of the shock and fear from last night had worn off. While I waited in line, I turned to stare back at the gate. Knox would probably drive right past me. I couldn't let that happen, so I called him. "I'm a block from your place. Meet me for breakfast," I said.
"I don't have time, Lucien."
"Make time. This is important. I have valuable information about your collection and getting the rest of it back. There's a coffee cart set up right near your neighborhood. It's a short walk. It won't take more than a couple of minutes."
"Fine. I'll be there as soon as I can, but I only have a few minutes."
Tucking the phone into my pocket, I ordered a cup of dark roast and paced the sidewalk beside the gate. The steam rose from the top of my cup, and I blew on it before taking a sip. The air was crisp. In a few hours, the sun would burn away the early morning haze, leaving a clear sky and nothing but the brutal cold. I shifted from one leg to the other, wriggling my toes to regain feeling in them. Had I planned better, I would have grabbed my wool overcoat and thermal socks. Vasily really knew how to inconvenience a guy. Come on, I thought. I haven't got all day. I resisted the urge to check the time. No more than 5 minutes had passed since the last time I looked. Where was Knox? At this rate, the man would be late for work. Well, later, since I had every intention of detaining him until he answered a few important questions to my satisfaction. The gate opened. Finally! I bounced on the balls of my feet, preparing to intercept him the moment he stepped foot on the sidewalk. But he didn't walk through the gate. Instead, a gray-haired woman and her bearded schnauzer did. The schnauzer strained against the leash, eager to go on his morning walk. But once he made it to the curb, he stopped. His ears perked up, and he stood as still as a statue. A deep growl emanated from within his taut body, and he bared his teeth.
"Buddy, you stop that right now."
She whacked the pooch on the backside with the newspaper.
"Where are your manners?"
She offered me an apologetic smile.
"He never does that. I don't know what's gotten into him."
"It's quite all right. Dogs usually like me." I crouched down for the dog to sniff my hand. But Buddy didn't budge. His ears flattened against his skull, and his sharp eyes zeroed in on something in the distance. He let out a deep, warning bark.
"Quiet, Buddy."
The lady tugged on the leash, but the dog didn't move. She scooped him into her arms and carried him past me. The dog's eyes remained on a fixed point as he continued to growl. I turned to see what caused the animal's unease. At first I didn't see anything. The morning mist mixed with plumes of exhaust limited visibility, but as the icy vapor dissipated, I spotted 2 men in dark overcoats at the bus stop. One of them carried a shiny metal briefcase, and the other had what appeared to be a golf club inside a sealed duffel bag. At least, I hoped it was a golf club. The only other option was a long gun, possibly a sniper rifle, which didn't bode well for my client or me. Taking another careful sip of the nearly scalding liquid, I returned to the coffee cart and pretended to study the menu while keeping one eye on the two men. I recognized them from the club last night. They were Vasili's enforcers. Did they follow me? I hadn't noticed anyone outside the police station, but that didn't mean anything. I'd missed a lot lately. Trusting my instincts and skills had failed me, resulting in Svetlana becoming an unnecessary casualty. Part of me wanted nothing more than to go over there and even the score, but that would be stupid. Right now I had to be smart. Everything from their cold weather gear to the bags they carried told me they were already here when I arrived.
Are you going to stand around all day and stare, or are you actually going to order something else, mister?
The guy at the coffee cart asked.
I got other customers in case you hadn't noticed.
Right, sorry. Give me a number 6. I pocketed a few napkins, watching as the bus rumbled down the street. The man held the brown paper bag in front of my face, shaking it for emphasis. I grabbed it and handed him a 20. Keep the change. The air brakes exhaled, and the bus lurched to a stop in front of the plexiglass structure. The doors opened, and a cluster of waiting passengers formed a line. The Russians remained seated, their noses and cheeks rosy pink. I was right. They'd been here a while and had no intention of leaving. The only question remaining was if they were sent to keep an eye on me or Knox. Several people exited from the rear of the bus, blocking my view, so I headed toward a nearby trash can. I couldn't lose sight of them. Doing so would be detrimental to someone's health, probably mine. The crowd moved past. The line for those boarding continued to grow, but neither of the enforcers made any attempt to join the early morning commuters. I decided it'd be best to wait them out, at least for now. I'd only make a move if they made one first. With nothing else to do, I pulled my sesame bagel out of the bag and took a bite. The toasty exterior was perfectly offset by a cool chunk of cream cheese sandwiched in the middle. I swallowed and wiped my mouth, barely remembering to chew. Damn, I was hungry. My attention remained split between the Russians across the street and the metal gate behind me. Where was Knox? Perhaps, under these circumstances, it'd be best if I went to him. For a moment I was distracted by thoughts of classic cartoons I'd watched as a kid. This must have been how the moose and squirrel felt watching the two spies, except these Russians weren't watching me back. As far as I could tell, they hadn't even noticed me. That meant they had to be here for Knox. I just didn't know why. Tossing the brown paper bag into the trash, I searched for a better vantage point to stake out Trey Knox's house, away from the prying eyes of Vasili's men. I had to spot Knox before they did, and if I could do it without them noticing me, that would make things even better. I was mid-dial, hoping Knox would answer and invite me in, when the gate slid open, and he emerged with a leather attaché case in one hand and a cell phone in the other. I peered around the thick trunk of the tree, feeling even more like I was trapped in an old cartoon. Surely this can't be happening, I thought, but it was.
Knox, go back inside,
I hissed. What? Why? He looked utterly bewildered. You said you wanted to meet. Just then his phone rang. He held up a finger, indicating I should wait, and answered. The moment the Russians spotted Knox, they split up. I lost sight of the one carrying the suspicious duffel, but the other one headed directly for us. I had to act, but the gate had closed. Knox had already trudged down the sidewalk to meet me near the coffee cart. Oblivious to the danger, he didn't notice the enforcer heading his way. The Russian brought the briefcase up to chest height, held it flat, and popped it open with his thumbs. In a flash, he removed a hidden gun, knocked the lid closed with his forearm, and slipped his hand inside his jacket to conceal the weapon. Mr. Knox, we need to go now. I grabbed his elbow, spun him around, and led him in the opposite direction. Lucien, I don't have time for this. I'm already late. You said we'd get coffee at the cart and talk. I told you it had to be brief. Change of plans. He tried to tug his arm free. Let go of me. You don't want me to do that. I squeezed his elbow harder, using his arm to steer him away from danger. He cautioned a glance over his shoulder. The man with the briefcase continued to follow us. Last night, Vasily Petrov paid me a visit. Care to explain why? What? Why? You tell me. Why would I know anything about that? Knox stiffened, stopping short. I'll call you back. he said to the person on the other end of the line, and stuffed his cell phone into his pocket. Oh, I don't know. Do you have any unpaid debts you forgot to mention? I pushed against his back to keep him moving. Debts? Gambling, loan sharks, that sort of thing. Alexei Balakin attacked a friend of mine a couple weeks ago and took his cash and drugs to make up for the trouble you caused. Do you want to guess who Alexei was working for at the time? Knox's face went white as a sheet. I don't know. If you're going to lie, at least make it believable. Now keep moving and keep your eyes facing forward. Why? What's going on? Where are you taking me? The light at the crosswalk turned red, halting our escape. I spotted the man with the duffel bag waiting on the other side. Vasili's men knew what they were doing. They intentionally herded us in this direction. They wanted to box us in. Come on, we can't stay here. I jerked Knox away from the crosswalk. Since we couldn't move forward, we'd have to move laterally. Whoa! He yanked his arm free, swinging his attaché case wildly. Are you crazy? Are you trying to get me splattered across someone's windshield? No, but Vasili's men are about to splatter your brains all over the sidewalk. We're out of options. Traffic wasn't moving that fast. We could make it, if we hurried. It's just like Frogger. What does that mean? It'll be fun. Fun? His eyes grew to the size of saucers. Well, more fun than a cigar cutter to the genitals or a gunshot to the noggin. Again, I flashed back to the club, feeling her blood spraying my face. The bagel had been a bad idea. I swallowed and shoved him into the street. The man who was tailing us removed the gun from inside his jacket and held it down by his thigh. Vasily must have instructed his men to handle this quietly. 2 silenced shots wouldn't be noticed, not on a busy street like this. If done correctly, Knox's body could be left on a bench or propped against a doorway, ensuring the Russians were long gone before the authorities arrived. Good news. I grabbed the attaché case from Knox's hand. It doesn't appear Vasily has any intention of torturing you. He just wants to kill you. As for me, the jury was still out. But Vasily needed me. I didn't think the kill team he had sent would harm me unless I interfered or the gangster had changed his mind. Knox opened his mouth to speak, but I pushed him across the first lane, propelling him forward with a hand between his shoulder blades. The man with the gun paced up and down the sidewalk, hoping to follow us across the street, but a sudden influx of cars stopped him. We darted through the traffic, amidst a sea of honking horns, squealing brakes, and shouted profanities. Knox tripped over the curb, skinning his palms on the pavement. I grabbed him underneath the arm and hauled him to his feet. We had to keep moving. My car was parked a block away. If we could get to it, we'd be safe. Lucien, he winced, rubbing his hands together. You gotta get me out of here. I don't want to die. Are you ready to tell me the truth? Yes, anything. Just get me out of here. I'm working on it. I turned to see where the shooter was, but I didn't spot him across the street. The man with the duffel remained at the crosswalk, waiting for the walk sign to illuminate. Hopefully his comrade was doing the same. Stay close. We only made it a few steps before the shooter hopped directly into our path from behind a parked car. The sun glinted off the silver suppressor. I reacted, swinging the confiscated attaché case against the Russian's extended arm. The gun went off. The shot impacted with a tree, causing the birds in the branches to scatter. Pivoting on my left foot, I followed through with a hook. It connected squarely with the Russian's jaw. The enforcer stumbled backwards, dazed by the unexpected hit. I grabbed for the gun, and we banged into the parked car. He lifted the weapon, and again, I batted it away with the attaché case. The force of the strike caused the handles to slip from my hand. The momentum of the clunky leather bag tugged the suppressed weapon from the Russian's grip, and the gun skittered into the street and clanged against a sewer grate. The shooter cursed and headbutted me. Pain erupted where he hit me, from my teeth to my forehead. Something snapped. I heard it at the same moment I felt it. I was temporarily blinded by the tears that sprang to my eyes. I swung blindly. My jab connected with his rib cage. He grunted, and I hit him again and again. I couldn't see, but I could hear and feel. From the grunts he emitted, I knew my punches were connecting. Shoot him! Knox urged, as he dashed around the bench to grab the papers flying in the air. One of the compartments of his attaché case had fallen open, spewing his work materials across the sidewalk and into the street. Passer-by had taken notice. Most gawked from a safe distance, but a few had come to assist, only to find me in the midst of a brawl. Great suggestion, I growled, aware of the blood dripping into my mouth. I swung again before taking a moment to wipe my eyes. The enforcer threw an uppercut which sent me reeling backwards. Everything spun. I teetered but stayed on my feet. A woman called 911 while several men shouted at us to stop fighting. The Russian turned, and I delivered one final blow before shoving him against the side of the car. Leaning in close, I said, "Tell Vasily I'll get him what he wants, but Knox is off limits. Got it?" He expelled a hot puff of acrid air into my face and smiled, his teeth tinged red with blood. He cursed at me in his native tongue and laughed. "Got it?" I asked again, but someone pulled me away before he could answer. A group of men surrounded me, while several others clustered around the now unarmed Russian, checking his injuries and asking if he was okay. A few guys got in my face. "Are you okay, man? You're bleeding." "No shit." I pressed a napkin to my nose and spun around, expecting to come face to face with the other Russian, but the second enforcer wasn't in the crowd. Pushing my way through the group of men, I searched for Knox. "Trey?" "Here," he said. The same guy who pointed out I was bleeding grabbed my arm. I spun, ready for another attack. He held up his palms and stepped away. "Cool it, man. You're already in enough trouble. The cops are on their way." Wonderful. I wiped my watering eyes again, catching the briefest glimpse of the oddly shaped duffel moving down the sidewalk in the opposite direction. It was suddenly too hot for the Russians to carry out the execution, which meant it was too hot for me to stick around. I pushed my way through the throng and grabbed Knox, who was reaching for a folder that had fallen beneath a bench. "Leave it. We have to go." Chapter 29. "Are you okay?" Knox asked. "Do I look okay?" I used one hand to hold a napkin to my nose while I drove with the other. "No." He exhaled, his left leg jittering up and down. "Maybe you should pull over. Can you even see to drive?" I turned my head, feeling the bruise along my jaw. "Think of it this way. If we die in a fiery car crash, Vasily's men can't kill you." "You don't have to be so mean," I cursed, slapping my palm against the steering wheel, which reverberated through my knuckles. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be in a street fight. Granted, it had only happened a handful of times before, but if memory served, I'd be feeling it for the next few days. Hell, I was already feeling it. "Where are we going?" he asked. "We just passed a police station." "We're not going to the police." "Okay." He fidgeted with the seatbelt, taking it off and untwisting the strap. "Why not?" "Are you prepared to explain to them what's going on?" He didn't say anything, confirming what I already suspected. Knox must have been involved in some sort of illegal activity. I just didn't know what, and he wasn't talking. "Are you sure you're okay to drive?" "Jesus." I switched lanes without looking and headed for Freddie G's place. I had to make sure Alexei or more of Vasily's men hadn't gone back to the penthouse to finish what they started. "Why didn't you go to the police in the first place?" "I couldn't." "Why not?" "It's complicated." "Not really. You screwed Vasily Petrov, so he's going to kill you." I glanced at him. "How did you cross paths with him?" "Gambling, I guess." "You guess?" I squeezed the steering wheel harder, attempting to keep my anger in check. "How much do you owe?" "Before interest, 30 grand. He swallowed. "I was good for it. I just needed to put some things together, but I had it." "You didn't pay on time?" "When I went back with the money, he told me it was now 60. "Did you give him what you had?" "No, I told him he couldn't do that, and I wouldn't give him back a dime." "And Vasily just let you walk away?" "Not exactly. I didn't meet with Vasily. The man I owed was a nobody bookie. I doubted he would do much. The whole kneecap thing only happens in movies, and everyone knows you can't kill someone who welches on his debt, or you'll never get paid." "Vasily found a workaround." "Yeah, I guess. I didn't realize that's who my bookie reported to. Not at first, anyway. I didn't know they emptied my house." "What did the message on your bathroom mirror say?" Knox stared at me, shocked that I knew about that. "How?" "Officer Gallo told me about the spray paint. What did it say?" "It said next time I'd pay in blood." "And you didn't think to mention this to me?" I slammed on the brakes, causing Knox to fall face first into the dashboard. Satisfied, I backed into a spot and cut the engine. "How could you have known what it said since the glass was shattered? Did you break the mirror?" I didn't know it was him. I panicked. I read the message and it freaked me out. I had to get rid of it." "How could you not know who wrote it?" None of this made any sense. "Who else wants to kill you?" Again, he shrugged. "Lots of people." "Really? If we lump Vasily and his goons together, I can only think of one other person who wants you dead, and he's sitting beside you. Who else am I missing?" "Seriously?" I snorted, which sent a wave of pain through my nose. Annoyed, I opened my door. "Stay here. I'll be back in a few minutes."
"You're just gonna leave me here alone?"
"You're right. That could be dangerous." I pulled a pair of handcuffs from my inner jacket pocket. "Give me your hands. I don't want you going anywhere without me." I gave him my most threatening stare. "It's not safe." Once he was cuffed to the steering wheel, I climbed out of the car. "I'll be back in a minute. Don't do anything stupid while I'm gone." I went inside and upstairs to the penthouse suite. After a solid minute of knocking, Freddie G. answered. From the leopard print pajamas he wore, I assumed he'd been in bed.
"Lucy, what happened to you?"
"It'd be easier if you asked what hasn't." I entered his apartment. "Do you have company?"
"No, my head's still foggy from the attack. It messes with my performance."
I eyed a few pill bottles on the kitchen table and went over to examine them. "Did the doc prescribe these?"
"I believe in self-medicating."
At the moment, so did I. I picked up a bottle of Vicodin. "You mind?"
"Help yourself."
I swallowed one down and tucked the bottle into my pocket. "Can I pay you next time?"
"Don't worry about it."
"I appreciate it." I took a seat at the counter while Freddie went to the fridge and came out with an ice pack.
"Tilt your head back."
He cringed, examining my nose.
"That looks bad. You're going to need someone to reset it for you."
He went into the bathroom and came back with a first aid kit and some tissues.
"You might want to pop another pill."
"Can't. I gotta drive."
"Still."
Without warning, he gave my nose a sharp tug. My eyes watered again, but the pain eased. Freddie went to the sink to wash his hands. After I shoved some rolled-up tissues in each of my nostrils to stop the bleeding, I wrapped my knuckles in the bandages and held the ice pack to my chin. "I didn't come here to get patched up."
"I didn't think you did, but you might as well. I'm nothing if not full service."
He poured himself a glass of orange juice and added a hefty splash of vodka to it. He held it out to me, but I waved it away. Pills and liquor don't mix well, especially when I had to remain alert and coherent.
"Were you the unknown call and text I got earlier?"
he asked.
"Yeah."
I adjusted the ice pack, suddenly exhausted. I'd been up all night, facing one trauma after another. "I have some questions. What can you tell me about Vasily Petrov?"
"You don't want to cross him. He's one evil son of a bitch. He'll kill his own people for looking at him wrong, and those are his friends. You don't want to know what he does to his enemies."
"You ever work for him?"
"Hello, I like to breathe."
"Do you know if Alexei works for him?"
"Possibly. I wouldn't doubt it. The Russians tend to cluster together. Between trafficking and bookmaking, they all run in the same circles."
"Not that we're profiling." He laughed.
"Not at all."
He swallowed half of the screwdriver in one gulp.
"So the two guys who broke in here and knocked me around, Vasily sent them?"
"It looks that way." Freddie finished his drink and made another one.
"Well, shit, I guess it's a good thing they didn't come here for me."
"What do you mean?"
"If Vasily Petrov sent guys here because of something I did, I'd be dead."
He stared out the window.
"I make it a point to avoid anyone with a rep for being a backstabber, or just a nasty, ruthless bastard. I don't do business with the Russians, and I don't do business with anyone who does, which means this is all because of that damned ring you wanted me to find."
"I didn't know Vasily had it." Freddie nodded.
"Are you going to be okay? I'm guessing the reason you look like that is because Vasily sent one of his boys to have a chat with you."
"Something like that." I put the ice pack down and got off the stool. "I'm sorry I dragged you into this."
"You didn't know."
He continued to stare out the window.
"The thing is, when assholes like that come into my house and take my stuff, I have a real problem with it. I'm no pushover. I got this desire to push back, which is stupid, but it's there, and it isn't going away."
"Neither are they."
"Yeah, that's what I figured. This won't stop unless someone makes it stop. Whatever you did kicked the hornet's nest. Now these fuckers are swarming around. It's been almost 2 weeks since they paid me a visit. Now you."
He sucked in his bottom lip and stared out the window. "I'll take care of it." I just wanted to make sure you were okay. I just wasn't sure how to get off Vasily's radar now that I was on it.
I'm fine. I can take care of myself. But it won't be that easy for you. He doesn't let people screw him over. Whenever Vasily's done playing with you, he's gonna kill you.
Yeah, I know. That's why I have to take care of it. Freddy gave me another look.
I'll help in any way I can.
Freddy?
No. He pissed me off. Now he's gonna get the horns. Tell me what you need me to do.
Nothing.
Bullshit.
I knew from Freddy's tone he was serious. I have to find out who Vasily's in business with, and why he made such a bold threat with such a short deadline. He must owe someone, or a deal's about to go down. One way or the other, I have to know about it. I didn't necessarily have those kind of contacts, but I knew some people who knew people. That had been one perk of growing up around cops.
I don't run in those circles, but I know some people who do.
He can't know I'm asking. It'll jeopardize everything. I met Freddy's eyes. Don't go out on a limb. Only people you trust, or no one at all, okay?
Whatever you want, Lucy, baby. You know me. I'm all about satisfying my clients.
He jerked his chin at my face.
By the way, you probably want to get a professional to look at that schnoz. I'd suggest a plastic surgeon. You don't want to end up like one of those ugly boxers with all that scar tissue and a deviated septum. Then the ladies will only be attracted to you for your money, and you don't want that.
I'll keep it in mind. I went to the door. Thanks for the ice and the pills. Chapter 30. Thankfully, Knox remained quiet until we arrived at my office. That gave me time to think, but I still hadn't come up with a solution. Men like Vasily Petrov didn't just let bygones be bygones. Even if I gave him precisely what he wanted, he'd shoot me and spit on my grave. I had to find a way to neutralize the threat. Perhaps blackmail would work. But I'd already turned over the storage unit. Either the police had enough to make a case or they didn't. Considering it had been over a week and no charges had been filed, I didn't have much faith in their evidence. As I waited for the elevator to open on my floor, I looked at my watch. With a little over 16 hours to go, I doubted I could come up with solid, irrefutable proof of Vasily's illegal enterprises in time to leverage that for my life. Paulie's pawn and the self-storage facility could be fronts. Maybe I'd have to hedge my bets and bluff my ass off. It could work. I had a great poker face. "Come on," I said when the doors opened. Knox followed me down the hall. I noticed the stenciling on the door as I opened it. Cross Security and Investigations. The writing wasn't very large, just like the office, but it was something I didn't want to lose. Gloria came around the desk, gently taking my face in her hands.
"What happened?"
"I got in an accident."
"You poor thing. Are you okay?"
"I'm fine." I gave her a reassuring smile, which made me wince. "Just a little banged up."
"Boss?"
Justin eyed me from his spot on the opposite side of the room. "When you get a chance, get a few recommendations for plastic surgeons and schedule a consultation for me."
"Are you going to change your face and disappear?"
Knox whispered. "No. But come to think of it, that might not be a bad idea. I made a mental note to consider that as a last resort. I'd like to come out of this no worse than when I went in."
"I'll get on that,"
Justin said. "Thanks." I turned to the receptionist. "Gloria, could you clear my schedule for today?"
"No problem."
I led Knox into the break room, closed the door, folded my arms over my chest, and stared at him. "Take a seat." Obediently, he sat.
"I'm really sorry about this."
"That makes two of us." I opened a cabinet, moving the liquor bottles out of the way while I searched for medical supplies. Once I found the first aid kit, I disinfected the cut on my nose and smoothed a bandage over it. That'd have to suffice for now. "Start at the beginning."
"You already know everything. I placed some bets that didn't pan out. They broke into my house and took everything to cover my debts, I guess. I wasn't sure that's what happened. I didn't think that could happen."
"And you didn't bother mentioning this could be a possibility even after I asked you point blank if you had debts. Instead, you turned it around on me. You're an asshole." Reaching into my pocket, I took out the pill bottle, shook a few into my palm, and swallowed them dry. At least my eyes had finally stopped watering, though that was the least of my problems.
What do you want me to do?
There's nothing you can do. It's up to me now. I wondered if I handed Knox over to Vasily on a silver platter, if that would make us even. But I didn't think so. Do you think your collection even comes close to covering your debts and whatever additional interest you accrued?
I don't know. My bookie basically doubled the amount I owed him. Who knows what he's decided my debt is or was? Did Vasily ask you for more money? Is that why they tried to kill me? They figure you'll pay up on my behalf?
You pissed Vasily off. That's why he wants you dead. It's simple.
But how? What did I do?
You hired me to steal your shit back. That was dumb. And I was the moron who took the case.
Is that why he came to you?
It was time I fess up. Vasily wants me to get his shipment out of police custody. Do you have any idea the kind of hell that will rain down if I do? Or the pain Vasily's prepared to inflict if I don't?
Shit.
My thoughts exactly.
Lucien, you gotta believe me. I didn't know this would happen. I needed the money. I didn't know he'd come to collect. I didn't realize he was behind the break-in. If I did, I never would have asked you to track down my stolen sports memorabilia. That championship ring alone is worth well into 5 figures.
I know what it's worth. So does Vasily. That's why he stole it. You should have told me from the beginning.
Would you have taken my case if I had?
Probably not. At least I would have known what was at stake. You didn't keep up with your payments. You didn't even try to make good on your debt. That's why he took the ring. Knox jittered his leg up and down, causing the floor to vibrate, something he'd been doing all morning.
All of this isn't because you just stole back the ring. I'm sure the rest of my collection would have covered most of my debt. Shit, you told me the ring was in a box. He wouldn't have even noticed if it was missing if you hadn't called the cops. You did that. That's all on you. I said the only thing that mattered was the ring. I could have lived without getting the rest back, but you pushed. It's not my fault the police confiscated everything in the storage unit. It's not my fault Vasily's pissed at you. It's yours.
Damn it, did you take a class on gaslighting? Because I'm not falling for your shit again. Perhaps Knox had a point, but I didn't see it that way. You lied to me. I held up a hand before he could protest. A lie of omission is still a lie. Is there anything else I should know? Anything at all? Now's the time. I had 16 hours until the deadline, and I still didn't know what I should do. Saving Knox's life and fighting off Vasily's enforcers hadn't earned me any favors with the gangster.
No.
Knox shook his head for emphasis.
That's it. I swear. Cross my heart and hope to die.
He drew an X on his chest with his pointer finger. Do you owe anyone else money?
No.
He reached for the bottle of Irish whiskey and poured it into a coffee cup with shaking hands.
I thought the matter was taken care of when I said I wouldn't pay. I was sure I'd be safe. Isn't it bad business to kill a debtor? That makes logical sense to me.
Vasily's no longer worried about your outstanding debt. He wants revenge. Knox took a swig directly from the bottle, capped it, and put it down beside the coffee cup.
Please, don't hand me over to him.
I should. I picked up the liquor bottle and moved it out of his reach. But I won't.
What are you going to do?
I wish I knew.
Can I ask you a question? Why did you call the cops about the storage unit? According to everything I know about you, you despise the police. It's part of the reason I trusted you to get my stuff back. I figured you wouldn't ask questions, and you wouldn't have any problem finding the thieves and stealing from them. Why didn't you leave the rest of it alone?
That question had been on my mind since the moment Svetlana's blood splashed against my face. At first, I blamed myself for her death. But that wasn't my fault. Vasily would have killed her anyway. She had to pay for her betrayal, and her murder gave the gangster the leverage he needed over me. It would only take one anonymous tip for the police to find her body, just like it took one call for them to raid the storage unit. Obviously, Vasily Petrov believed strongly in an eye for an eye. Even if I was cleared of murdering the prostitute, the look of impropriety might be enough to deter future clients from hiring Cross Security and drive a larger wedge between my firm and local law enforcement. If my private investigator license was revoked, I'd be out of business. Vasily didn't have to kill me. He had plenty of other ways to make my life miserable. But he'd kill me. Freddie told me as much, and after what I'd witnessed in the last 8 hours, I didn't doubt it.
Lucien?
Knox waved a hand in front of my face.
Are you still with me? Why did you involve the police?
Besides finding your ring, I also discovered several other interesting items.
You thought the thieves had stolen from other people too?
I thought it was possible. The bricks of cocaine and crates of assault weapons had driven me over the edge. I had to call in the tip. I couldn't turn a blind eye to that kind of contraband. My gut said the drugs and guns were what Vasily wanted back. He must have been in the midst of a deal, and with the merchandise gone, he could no longer deliver. His buyers would not be pleased. Maybe they threatened him. That would explain why he was anxious to get his shipment back and why he'd put me on such a tight deadline. I could work with that. Grabbing the same burner phone I'd used earlier, I sent a message to Freddie and told him to let me know as soon as he found someone who could verify my theory. Hopefully it'd pan out. I needed as many details as I could get if I wanted to stand a fighting chance.
I guess it doesn't pay to do the right thing,
Knox mused. How would you know? None of your actions have been remotely close to the right thing. I opened the freezer and took out an ice pack before glancing at my reflection in the mirror. I looked like a boxer who'd lost a fight. Maybe that would earn me some sympathy. I'll take care of this. In the meantime, you need to stay here. Don't call anyone. Don't go out. Vasily wants you dead. He'll send more of his men to finish the job unless I can convince him otherwise.
Yeah, okay, no problem.
I held out my hand. Give me your phone. Vasily could be tracking it. Tracking you. It's for your safety. When this is over, you'll get it back.
Sure.
He fished it out of his pocket.
I owe you.
Don't worry. I'll send you a bill. I suggest you pay it this time. Stepping out of the tiny break room, I pulled the door closed behind me and scrolled through the call logs, text messages, and contacts on Knox's phone, but nothing stood out. I went into my office and plugged the device into my computer. While I ran reverse lookups on the numbers and read each and every message, Justin barged into my office.
You have a consultation with the plastic surgeon on Wednesday, he said.
Let's see if I'm still breathing by then. If not, I'll need you to cancel.
Will do.
When the phone numbers didn't connect to any gangsters, con men, or bookies, I unhooked the phone from the computer and tossed it to Justin. Hold on to this. I don't want Knox making any calls or contacting anyone. He's not the sharpest tool in the shed. He could compromise his safety and yours by doing something asinine.
Okay, I'll keep an eye on him.
Thanks. I climbed out of the chair, my shoulders and back stiff and sore. Crinkling my nose, I winced, which made my eyes water again. Damn it. I grabbed a tissue from the box.
Lucien?
Justin dropped into one of my client chairs.
What's going on? How can I help?
It's best if you don't.
You're probably right, but you need my help.
No.
Come on, boss. We've been in scrapes together before.
Not like this.
Is this another Scott Renwin situation?
Worse. He stared at me, slowly deflating in my chair.
You need to call your dad.
I can't. This is basically a hostage situation.
Who's being held?
My assistant seemed even more freaked out now than when he had spotted my bloody clothing in the bag last night. My freedom, my livelihood, my life. I unlocked my bottom drawer and took out the emergency funds I kept there and a backup to my backup. I appreciate everything you do around here, but I have to do this on my own.
That didn't work out so well last time.
This isn't like last time. Knox will be here with you. He'll be safe.
That's why you have our security teams guarding Gloria and me? So we'll be safe?
They could use the practice. I swallowed. If I don't come back, take Knox to the precinct, turn over our records, and call Almeida. That should be enough for Sarah to piece everything together.
Sergeant Rostakowski?
Yep.
Are you sure you can handle this?
There's only one way to find out. But if this is it, you know what to do.
Rename the business and order new stationery?
I smiled. Exactly. Chapter 31. Hey, Sarah. I kept my sunglasses on as I waited for her to step out for lunch. She always took her break at the same time each day, unless something pressing was going on inside. Luckily, today was a slow day for the city's finest.
Jesus,
She clutched her chest dramatically.
You know better than to sneak up on a cop.
She peered at me.
What the hell happened to you? You didn't look like that a few hours ago.
I got into a fight with my desk chair. It slid out from beneath me, and I hit my face right on the edge of my desk.
Ouch.
She didn't believe me, but that didn't matter. Why are you back to pester me? I need a favor. That'll cost you lunch. I don't have time for lunch, but I need to know if gangs, narcotics, or organized crime has any operations in the works. She grabbed my arm and stopped dead in her tracks.
What are you doing? You know better than to mess with people like that. Drugs are bad. Don't you remember the egg in the frying pan?
I just need to know if any big exchanges are going down. She pursed her lips and turned to stare at the people passing us on the sidewalk. I work the desk, and everyone talks to you. You know more about what goes on inside the precinct than anyone else. Why do you want to know? Morbid curiosity. Try again. Sarah, please. She looked the other way before looking back at me. I heard something about the KXDs wanting to make a play for the big time. They're hoping to get into business with one of the syndicates to run drugs and girls. When? I have no idea. Before I could open my mouth, she added, and no, I can't find out. Anything else? Whatever you're doing or thinking about doing, don't. You are private security, Lucien Cross. Organized crime and gang activity has absolutely nothing to do with you. That is a police matter. You interfere, and I'll personally throw your ass in jail. You'd arrest me? I thought you liked me. Don't you think of me like a nephew? What about all those times you babysat me? You mean on the rare occasion your dad brought you to work and didn't have any idea what to do with you? Yeah. I offered a charming smile. That's precisely why I'll taser you and handcuff you to my desk. Arresting you would be a kindness, a necessity to save your life. I'm not doing anything. You better not. She thought about the way I hugged her this morning. The last time you asked me for information, you nearly died. Don't you dare do that to me again. I won't. I promise. After my visit to the precinct, I returned to the office and did some digging on the intel Sarah had provided. I didn't know much about the local gangs or what they planned to do, so I asked around. Apparently, one of the gangs wanted to make a power play. They figured the easiest way to do that would be to convince the Russians to enter into a partnership. The gang would move product, take a cut, and hand the rest back to Vasily. However, from what I'd been told, the rest of the Russian crime syndicate wasn't pleased with this arrangement. They wanted to keep things in-house. Sourcing out drugs and girls to a gang was beneath them. It would harm their reputation and decrease the perceived power they held. But Vasily thought this would be a great opportunity to gain more power and expand into gang-controlled territories. He figured he'd use the gang to his benefit, just another pawn in his game. That meant everything had to go right. And I'd screwed that up by having his shipment intercepted by the police. Why didn't the Russians just send for another shipment? I wondered. This wasn't making much sense, but they might have had transport issues or customs issues. More than likely, it was neither. Vasily still had his own territories to supply. The strip joints, the clubs, and the street corners he controlled. He needed back those 50 kilos and the guns to go with it. I brought up blueprints on the evidence warehouse and dug into the police database, searching for info on protocols and procedures. The evidence warehouse was one of the most secure buildings in the city. It contained everything to make or break cases, convict offenders, and enough cash and contraband to finance someone's own private island and army. Getting inside would be hard enough. Getting through the gate and into the locker would be even harder. This wasn't like the evidence room at the precinct. This was centralized for the entire city. I couldn't get in and out without detection, especially if I had to lug out 2 crates of assault weapons and 50 bricks of cocaine. I'd need forklifts and diversions. Stop it, I mumbled. My mind had gone to dark places, daydreaming about blowing up the side of the building and hauling off with the loot. Truthfully, I had no desire to give any of these things back to Vasily. He'd put them on the street and people would die. It was that simple, and I wanted no part of it. Plan B it is. I just didn't know what that was. If I could con the gangster, I could buy some time. But even if I succeeded, That wouldn't solve my problem in the long term. As soon as he found out I couldn't deliver, he'd kill me. So I had to deliver, or make him believe I could. But then what? He's going to kill you either way, the voice in my head reminded me. My phone rang. I picked it up, staring at it a bit too long before figuring out what to do with it. Yep, that probably meant I needed to lay off the painkillers. They didn't help me think. But since I figured I was a dead man walking, I hadn't exactly refrained from making my remaining hours as pleasant as possible. And with a broken nose and a looming death threat, that wasn't an easy feat. Sober up, Cross. You have too much riding on this. I answered the phone. What did you find out? Deal's going down at 4 a.m., right after the club closes. Vasily's supposed to make the exchange in the back room of one of the strip joints. He's unloading all the coke and the weapons, Freddie said. Same buyer? As far as I know. I didn't ask too many questions. You said you didn't want this getting back to him. No, you're right. Thanks. If it hadn't been for Freddie's continued rambling, I might have hung up before he got to his second point. I made a few exaggerated blinks to focus my mind. It might not have been the pain pills. It could have been lack of sleep. I set up a meet between you and the Irish. They might know more about what's going on than you do. They definitely aren't fans of Mr. Petrov, so I think they'll help for a price. How much did you agree on? 12. Guns aren't cheap, especially the ones you want. Thanks. I hung up and counted the money I kept on hand for emergency use. $5,000. I could withdraw another 7 from the bank. Cash was nearly untraceable, which would be good because I didn't want my name tied to organized crime or possible terrorist activity across the pond. This had to be the lesser of two evils, but I still didn't like it. Hoping my gun problem was solved, I now had to deal with the drug problem. More importantly, I needed to figure out what exactly I was working with. I hadn't paid much attention before I tipped off the cops, so I'd have to pay more attention now. First stop, the bank. Then, the evidence warehouse. After that, the grocery store for supplies. I'd swing by and pick up the guns, and then I'd be set. Except that would only buy me a bit more time. I still had to figure out how to eliminate the threat, and aside from waging a one-man war against Vasily and his men, I was out of ideas. All right, I'm leaving. I looked around my office for what might be the final time. I'll see you tomorrow. Maybe. You're not driving, Justin said, more of a statement than a question. I'll call you a cab. You always watch out for me. That means a lot. He gave me a look and picked up the phone. Luckily, Gloria had already gone home for the day, so I didn't have to deal with her concerned looks or questions. Her heart was in the right place, but I didn't want to drag her into any of this. When the cab arrived, I went downstairs and climbed in. After giving the driver the address for the bank, I settled into the seat and closed my eyes. Sleep when you can, my mentor had said when I'd been shadowing him for those 200 hours to get my license. He'd meant on stakeouts, when working with another investigator, but I'd been awake for at least 30-something hours. Given the circumstances, I decided that meant it applied now. I just hoped Vasily didn't have men tailing me, because I would never notice. Chapter 32. We're here. The cabbie turned around, knocking his fist against the partition that separated us. Wake up, mister, this is your stop. Slowly, I opened my eyes and looked around. Are you sure? Doesn't look like much. This is the address you gave me. He stared at me. You want me to take you somewhere else instead? Actually, I reached into my wallet. Would you mind keeping the meter running? This shouldn't take long. I passed him $50. The first cabbie who'd driven me to the bank had no interest in chauffeuring me around for the day and had taken off as soon as I got out of the car. I hoped my luck would improve with this second taxi driver. I'll give you another 100 if you're still here when I get back. The cabbie peered out the windshield. Yeah, okay. But this better not be a drug deal. It's not. My drug dealer lives in a much nicer neighborhood. He snorted, thinking it was a joke. I'll be here. Great. Stumbling out of the cab, I regretted popping those painkillers when I'd returned to the office the first time. The benefits had worn off, leaving me a little dizzy, groggy, and nauseous. At least I'd listened to Justin and didn't drive myself. Heavy machinery and narcotics didn't mix. That's why the bottle came with a warning label. I blinked a few times and stared bleary-eyed at the numbers above the door. This was the place. On my way inside, I unbuttoned my jacket. The police officer behind the desk barely glanced up when I walked into the evidence warehouse. "Sign in." He slid the clipboard through the opening in the cage. I picked up the pen, wondering what I should write. But this guy appeared to be bored. He'd do everything by the book. So I wrote my John Hancock neatly on the line and slowly reached into my jacket for my ID. He took the clipboard back and read what I had written. "Badge number?" "I don't have one." I handed him my ID. "I just wanted to check on what was cataloged. My dad said it'd be okay." "Who the hell's your dad?" "Commissioner Cross." "Seriously?" He exchanged a look with one of the cops posted on the outside of the cage. "Call him up and ask. I'll wait. I'm sure he doesn't have anything better to do." "What did you want to know?" "I provided the department with a tip about a bust at a storage facility 2 weeks ago. Lots of stuff came in. I just wanted to know about the drugs and guns." "Why?" "You realize informants get rewarded based on a percentage of the bust. I wanted to know how many kilos and how many guns we're talking." The officer stared at me. "What happened to your face?" "I got in an accident." "With someone's fist?" "Yeah." "Uh-huh." He pulled up the inventory list. 50 bricks, 2 dozen assault rifles, and 6 handguns. "Make and model?" "Why do you need to know that?" "I just do." "Knowledge like this isn't for public consumption." "It'll be introduced into evidence at trial. Those records will be made public. I don't see what the big deal is if I find out then or I find out now." "I just want to know why you want to know." "Because Dad's worried about things going missing from here. I'm not supposed to say anything, but you seem like an upstanding guy and a decent cop. The DA's office has complained that evidence has disappeared a time or two." I stared at him for a moment before flicking my gaze over my shoulder at the other cops. "You know exactly what I'm talking about, don't you?" "That's why I was asked to check in. IA has their suspicions on who's involved, but if they're wrong, they can't risk telling a dirty cop what they're doing." "So they sent you? You're not even a cop." "No, but I'm the commissioner's best-kept secret." Actually, my father would probably do everything in his power to make my entire existence a secret if he could, but that was beside the point. I didn't think the officer believed me, but since I didn't actually ask him to do anything illegal, he pushed away from the desk. "Hang on a sec." He disappeared into the rows of shelves. When he returned, he had a few evidence bags in his hands. "You can see for yourself." I stared at the assault rifles. Kalashnikovs. I'd remembered them correctly. At least I hadn't made plans to purchase incorrect assault weapons. "What are those, AK-12s?" "Uh-huh." Those weren't easy to find. No wonder the price was so high. "What about the handguns?" "They're just SIGs. Nothing special." He held one up, and I analyzed the details and notations on the evidence bags. "What about the coke?" He held up a brick, which had been tested and carefully wrapped. Official police evidence tape covered the bottom portion. The lab results were marked on the form, along with the tech's initials, date tested and date collected. "It's coke. What do you want with it?" "Nothing." It hadn't been divided into little baggies, so that'd make my life easier. I just wanted to make sure it was all still here and sealed. None of the bricks have walked off, right? "Nope." "Did you count them?" "Give me a break." The cop jerked his chin toward the door, indicating it was time I leave. "Tell the commissioner everything's good unless you think it'd be better if I call him and tell him myself." I held up my palms and stepped back. "No, looks like you have everything squared away." I squinted at his nameplate. "Officer Delane." I headed for the door. "Dad will be pleased." When I got back into the waiting cab, I handed the driver the $100 I promised him.
"Now where do you want to go?"
he asked. "I need to get some groceries."
"Any store in particular?"
I gave him the address of one of the bigger supermarkets and eased deeper into the seat. Before I took another unintentional catnap, I sent a message to Freddie and gave him the updated list. He knew arms dealers. Supposedly, he never did direct business with them, but he claimed to be able to get anyone anything. And right now, I needed to make sure the Irish had 2 dozen Kalashnikovs and a few SIGs waiting for me. Less than 20 seconds passed before he gave me an affirmative, along with a name, address, time, and place for the exchange. Reassured that Vasily would have no way of knowing what I was up to, I let my eyes close and thought about how costly this endeavor would be. Money wasn't important, I reminded myself, but I didn't completely believe it. However, in the grand scheme of things, I could always find ways to make more money. I couldn't exactly find a way to resurrect myself if Vasily Petrov shot me dead or the police decided to lock me away in a deep, dark hole and throw away the key. Still, it would be cheaper and safer to take back Vasily's shipment from the police evidence locker, but the police department wouldn't agree, and if things went south, I didn't want Vasily to win. Returning the contraband wouldn't ensure my survival. If anything, it'd give him a reason to kill me faster. What a mess, I mumbled. The cabbie cleared his throat, but he didn't speak. For the brief ride, I slept, wondering if today would be my final day on Earth. If it was a really shitty day. I wanted a do-over, somewhere warm with tropical drinks and skinny dipping with Jade. That'd be nice. Maybe she would agree to meet up for the occasional vacation. But I didn't know. Right now, I didn't even know if it'd ever be safe for her to be around me again. Everything rested on tonight. Chapter 33.
Are you sure you have everything you need?
Freddie G. stared at the cases, covering the counter and table of the penthouse.
This is insane.
Yeah, so?
He laughed. I always knew there was a reason I liked you.
I thought it's because I pay well and don't ask for anything too ridiculous.
No elephants or tigers on a leash.
Someone asked you for a tiger on a leash?
Not to keep, just to show up at a birthday party. A rented tiger on a leash.
That doesn't make it better.
Probably not for the tiger, but his trainer was pleased.
I shook my head, not wanting to think about the illegalities of the exotic animal trade. As it was, I already had plenty of other illegal ventures to think about. Breaking down another assault rifle, I made sure the weapon was unloaded and removed the firing pin. Then I reassembled it and tossed it in a box. Freddie wandered toward the bricks of cocaine, which I'd wrapped in evidence tape and labeled, just like the confiscated stuff, along with the forged test results and Tech's initials. Hopefully, Vasily would believe it was legit right out of lockup. The last thing I needed was for him to test it.
What is this stuff?
Freddie held up one of the bricks.
Mind if I have a taste?
I do. He put the brick back down.
I thought you were supposed to be giving him back the drugs.
Those aren't drugs. They're baking supplies. Flour, cornstarch, sugar, that kind of thing. I chuckled. The woman at the register asked if I owned a bakery.
What did you tell her?
That I was participating in a bake sale to raise money for refugees.
What did she say?
She gave me $5. Freddie laughed.
And the tape and official forms? Where did you get those?
The tape I had from when I swiped it a few years ago to use at a Halloween party, and the forms came off my printer.
If things don't pan out, you might want to go into forgeries. Start with passports. We'll both need a one-way ticket out of the country if Vasily finds out what you have in store for him.
Sucking in a breath, I forced myself to focus on disarming the weapons. I didn't want to think about what was to come. I'd sent an anonymous message to the head of the gang to tell him the Russians intended to double-cross him. I'd given vague details about a second buyer who offered more money for the product, which would explain any delay that might have occurred. I'd also alluded to the Russians' unwillingness to deal with non-Russians and the possibility that the product might not be as pure as expected. Without knowing if he believed me, I didn't know what the gang leader would do. But he'd replied, and we had exchanged numbers. I told him I'd let him know as soon as I found out the time and place the Russians planned to meet with their other buyers. I'd been afraid to give too much away because I didn't know how reliable my intel was. The local gang and foreign gangster could already be in bed together, but I counted on a level of distrust between the two. All right, I finished removing the last firing pin. Now I just have to load everything into the car.
Your car?
Hell no. I got a rental that doesn't link back to me.
So when did you become some secret ninja spy?
When you weren't looking. I grabbed one of the boxes and sealed the top. Do you mind helping me carry these downstairs?" He looked at his nails, as if about to say he'd just had a manicure, but thought better of it and picked up one of the other boxes.
"I did offer to help any way that I could. I guess this is me getting off easy." He laughed. "You know what? That sounds like a brilliant idea."
As soon as we loaded up the back of the SUV, he pulled out his phone and texted the woman from the other night.
"You want to stick around for a few minutes and go out with a bang? She has a friend."
No, that's how I got into this mess. I watched the reflected city lights dance across the water's surface. This was a bad idea. Possibly the worst one I ever had. I never thought of myself as a killer. So what was I doing here? I had spent the day collecting everything I needed to pull this off, but I was starting to have doubts. With enough time and planning, I could have devised a scheme to steal what I needed from the evidence room, but that would have required days or weeks of planning. Vasily didn't give me that much time, and even if he had, he'd kill me. The tiny, naive voice in my mind kept saying if I followed the rules and had been a good boy, he'd leave me alone. That voice sounded a lot like my father. But following the rules had never gotten me anywhere good. It had gotten me kicked out of the police academy and fired from my Wall Street job. No, rules were meant to be broken, which is how I ended up devising Plan B. Except Plan B required precise timing. Whenever Vasily showed up, I'd have to get things moving. I still had 2 hours until deadline, but I arrived early at the wharf and found a spot where I could keep my eye on Pier 19. Getting out to stretch my legs, I opened the rear hatch and moved the guns into an extra-large, rolling suitcase before filling a second suitcase with the white bricks. Vasily should be pleased. These would replace what the cops confiscated, more or less, but he'd never see this as a completed business transaction. He'd probably kill me on the spot, or he'd use me to get more drugs and guns. Believing I could get in and out of the evidence warehouse would open up a whole new world to him. If he let me live, he'd never let me go free. That thought hadn't occurred to me until now. I slammed the trunk, more resolute in my decision, and got back behind the wheel. I looked down at the unregistered gun on the seat beside me. Killing Vasily had a certain appeal, but pulling the trigger would place an even greater target on my back. His family would want revenge, and this would never end. I flexed my gloved fingers, comforted by the familiar creaking of the leather. Then I checked to make sure the gun was loaded, something I'd already done 100 times. Even though I didn't plan to shoot him, I'd do it if I ran out of options. "You're losing it," I muttered, tucking the gun into my holster. My hands weren't nearly as steady as they should be, on account of the caffeine and adrenaline, but on the bright side, I was finally awake and alert. When this was over, I'd go home, pop a few pills, and sleep for days. Or I'd die on the pier and sleep for all eternity. Either way, I'd get my rest. Headlights bounced off the pavement, but the car kept going. I glanced at the neon display on the dash. It was too early. He shouldn't be here yet. Again, I considered phoning the authorities, but that's how I got into this mess. Plus, power and money spoke volumes. Vasily would walk. I knew it in my gut. And once he was a free man, I'd be right back here, or in worse shape. My mind wandered to thoughts of Jade. Her gorgeous eyes and fiery red hair brought a smile to my lips. For the first time since she left the city and left me, I felt relief. Vasily didn't know about her. He'd never find her. She was safe. No matter what happened tonight, she would be okay. That consoling thought bolstered my confidence. I could do this. I had to do this. Settling deeper into the seat, I checked the time again and reached for the burner phone. Instead of messaging Freddie, I sent another anonymous message to the gang leader with the place and time of Vasily's alleged double cross, a.k.a. his meeting with me. The seconds ticked by faster and faster. I could feel the end getting closer, the air electrifying. Suddenly I wasn't afraid. Okay, maybe a little, but I was also exhilarated by the adrenaline high. Any minute now. As if on cue, an Escalade parked in front of the pier. 2 men got out. Even in the dim lighting, I could see the machine pistols hanging at their sides. The one on the right opened the rear door, and Vasily Petrov stepped out. I typed another text message, put the rental in gear, and drove the few yards to the pier. Parking at an angle with the rear corner facing the waiting Russians, I took a deep breath and opened the car door. It was game time.
Mr. Cross?
Vasily smiled, his accent more pronounced.
What happened to your face?
You should know. I glanced at his men but didn't recognize either of them. Where are Boris and Natasha?
Who?
He asked. Never mind.
Do you have my shipment?
Did you get my message? Trey Knox is off limits. You don't touch him. His debt is forgiven. Understand?
That matter doesn't concern you.
Consider me concerned. How much does he owe you?
You mean before all the additional trouble he caused?
Yeah, before that.
75.
I whistled. That's a lot of money. He didn't borrow that much.
He also didn't pay. I have a business to run. Surely a man of your nature can understand that.
I can. But I didn't have that kind of cash, and neither did Knox. I want you to be compensated for the initial loan. I tossed the MVP championship ring to Vasily. Sports collectors will pay through the nose for that, possibly even double or triple what it's worth. Will that cover it? Vasily held up the ring, examining it beneath the dim lights.
Da. I have grown weary of Mr. Knox and his peculiarities.
The Russian tucked the ring into his breast pocket.
I'll consider his debt paid in full if you delivered my shipment. If not, neither of you will enjoy what happens next.
Don't get your panties in a twist. I got your drugs and guns. The rest of that crap wasn't worth the effort. I clicked the hatch release. The lights flashed, and the rear gate popped open. I took a step back and to the side, catching a glimpse of 2 approaching vehicles. Who knew gangs were this punctual? Vasily said something in his native tongue, and the man on the left lifted the hatch and pulled one of the suitcases closer. He unzipped it and took out an assault rifle, examined it, put it to the side, inventoried the rest of the contents, and said something to Vasily.
How did you get them out of evidence?
Vasily asked. You know who I am. You know who my father is. How do you think I got them? He chuckled.
You said it couldn't be done. This just proves anything can be done with the proper incentive.
He said something to his men, and the one exploring the cargo hold checked the rifle and offered a response. Vasily frowned.
The guns are empty. Where are the bullets?
Bottom of the bag. The enforcer peered inside again, finding what he was looking for, and loading the rifle he had placed to the side. The last thing I needed was for him to test fire it. I needed more time. Just a few more minutes for the gang to get here and break up this little shindig. Another thought came to mind. Would I die in the crossfire? Or by gang bullets, since I was an alleged interloper? My brilliant plan didn't seem as brilliant as it had 10 minutes ago. Whoa there, cowboy, I said to the man holding the rifle. Don't you want to see what's behind door number 2 first?
Ivan, not yet.
Vasily shook his head, and the man lowered the gun.
Open the other bag.
Ivan unzipped the suitcase and held it open for Vasily to see. The white powder bricks practically glowed in the dark. The Russian licked his lips and eyed the police evidence labels, complete with case number and initials. He believed this was their stash.
All right, comrade, you've impressed me. Knox is forgiven,
Vasily said.
I'll let him live out the rest of his worthless life. He'll probably die old and pathetic.
Ivan zipped the second suitcase, hefted it out of the trunk, and rolled it to Vasily's vehicle. He secured it in the back seat and shut the door. Then he returned to the rental and picked up the rifle. "What are you doing?" I asked as Ivan pointed the rifle at me. My gaze darted to the 2 vehicles. By now they had parked 100 yards away. I thumbed the phone in my pocket, hoping to hit the right button to send the pre-typed text. That was one of the few benefits to flip phones, besides the price and disposable nature. I thought we were square.
You interfered in my business. You stole from me. No one steals from me, Mr. Cross. Not even you.
Ivan squeezed the trigger, confused when it failed to fire. Did I mention I removed the firing pins? I couldn't wait any longer. I pulled my gun, an untraceable piece my new Irish pals had included in our deal, and shot Ivan before he could switch to the machine pistol hanging at his side. The Russian stumbled backwards. He didn't even hit the ground before Vasily and the second enforcer opened fire. I darted around the side of the SUV, running in a crouch. Bullets impacted all around me, leaving deep pockmarks in the metal shell. Skidding to a stop in front of the vehicle, I gripped the brush guards with my free hand and peered around the sides. My breath came in ragged gasps.
"Don't make this more difficult,"
Vasily warned.
"Accept your fate and die like a man."
You first. I fired blindly in Vasily's direction. The Russians returned fire. 3 sets of bullets rang out. Obviously, the man I shot had worn a vest, or this gun was a piece of crap. Another barrage blasted in my direction, shattering the side mirror and taking out the turn signal. That was close. Too close. I moved toward the middle of the SUV. Gunfire broke the rear window and burst through the front windshield, showering me in glass fragments. Based on the footsteps, the 2 enforcers were coming around the side. I couldn't stay here. Help wasn't arriving. The gang leader, who I thought might save me, appeared to be taking his sweet time enjoying the crisp night air. "Stay back!" I slid to one side, firing blindly around the front tire before lunging to the other side and firing a few more shots. I heard a grunt, which I hoped meant I'd hit someone. I'd lost track of Vasily. He probably went back to the car to stay warm. It was cold out, not that I'd noticed much of anything with the glass and bullets flying in my direction. All right. It was time to move on to Plan C. Across the parking lot were freight containers and some warehouses. A good 50 yards stood between me and the nearest structure. I couldn't escape that way without getting a few more holes in my back. Considering my options were to stay here and die, or make a run for it, I had to at least try. Run in a zigzag. Don't look back. Don't stop moving no matter what. If I did that, I might survive. Getting into position, I placed one hand on the ground in a runner's lunge. 3, 2, gunfire erupted behind me, and Vasily let out a surprised scream. I didn't understand Russian, but from the gangster's frantic tone, I knew the ambush worked. Vasily's buyers, the gang, hadn't been pleased by the delay, and they were even less pleased to learn that Vasily had lied to them and decided to sell to a competitor for a higher price. The late-night exchange and the bag of unidentified powder safely tucked in the back of the Escalade proved it. Vasily had double-crossed them. Plan B had worked. But before I could celebrate this small win, I realized this left me with one big problem. When the gang finished dealing with the Russians, they'd want to knock off the competition. I had to get out of here. More shots pinged against the rental, popping the rear tires with a sudden whoosh. Despite the crossfire, Vasily remained determined to kill me. Ivan had retreated, but the other enforcer continued to fire pot shots along the driver's side. I'd never make it across the parking lot, and with 2 busted tires and bullets flying, I couldn't drive away. That left only one clear path down the pier. It was a long, narrow, straight line with no cover. By the time I made it far enough to board a boat, I'd be dead. Fuck it. I edged along the front of the vehicle until I was positioned behind the passenger side tire. Inhaling a deep breath, I let it out, sucked in another one, and burst into a run, firing at Vasily and the gang as I ran. I took 2 steps onto the rickety wooden pier and dove into the water. The freezing cold assaulted my senses and instantly cramped my muscles, but I forced my limbs to obey and swam underwater beneath the dark pier until I reached the end. Surfacing, I gripped the wood piling and waited. My teeth chattered, and I wondered if I'd freeze to death. My hands and feet were numb, and my legs were already tingling. I wouldn't last in the frigid water much longer. Gunfire continued. A few shots nicked the wood above me, but the majority weren't concentrated at the pier. A pained scream rang out, followed by another gurgling cry. That was the sound of men dying. Soon the gunfire abated. I listened, straining to hear over the lapping waves and the blood rushing in my ears. Was it over? I didn't dare move. I waited, knowing I couldn't wait too long. The firefight would attract attention. I had to disappear, possibly forever. No, don't think like that. Again, I found myself annoyed by the optimistic voice in my head, and for the 1,000th time today I questioned my own sanity. Finally, I dragged myself onto the pier. The 2 foreign vehicles had vanished, leaving no trace of the gang's presence, except for the Russians dead in the street. The back door of Vasily's Escalade remained open. As I approached, I recognized it as the white Escalade I'd seen parked outside Olympus. I hadn't imagined it. Vasily had been keeping tabs on me. That's how he knew which club I started going to, and how to tell one of the working girls to approach me. He'd been observing. But for how long? Had he been watching me since I took Trey Knox's case? He must have known what I was up to. But why? How? I didn't have time to think about it now. The cops were on their way. The suitcase with the fake drugs was gone, but the bag of assault rifles remained. At least those would be off the street, even if I'd paid a hefty price to get them here, a price that might fund the IRA or whatever Irish resistance group currently existed. But I'd have to find a way to make peace with that. It had been the lesser of 2 evils, or so I'd hoped. I'd been extremely careful. None of this connected to me. The gun, the phone, the car, they'd all been untraceable and disposable. For the first time in 24 hours, I didn't have to look over my shoulder. Only one thing could connect me to this scene, and I sure as hell wasn't going to leave without it. I win, asshole. I looked down at Vasily. The large man had been struck at least 6 times. I reached into his breast pocket and removed the ring. That was the only damning piece of evidence, and now it was gone. Sirens grew louder in the distance. The police could clean up the mess. Secure in knowing I was finally safe, I wrapped my arms around my shivering body and set out for the nearest bus stop. From there I called a cab and went home. Once I was dry and warm, I phoned Justin. "I just wanted to make sure you didn't order new letterheads yet."
Not yet. Is everything okay?
"I hope so. Tell Knox he can go home. I'll stop by and see him tomorrow, but Vasily won't bother him again."
Will do.
I yawned, wanting nothing more than to climb under the covers. "Thanks, Justin. Get some sleep. You've earned it."
A raise would be nice, too.
"You already own shares in the company. What more could you possibly want?"
I'll make a list.
"Fine. Give it to my assistant and tell him to take care of it." He laughed.
I'll see you tomorrow, boss.
"Actually, aside from paying Knox a visit, I'm taking the day off." Chapter 34. I slept in the next morning, something I hadn't done since recovering from surgery. Despite getting plenty of rest, I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. Both of my eyes were black, my nose was swollen to the point where I had to breathe out of my mouth, and my jaw hurt as I chewed my cereal. The rest of me didn't feel much better either. My back had started spasming in the middle of the night and had yet to stop. My limbs were sore and achy. Somehow I thought I'd feel better today, relieved or just lighter, but I didn't. I felt like shit and I looked just as bad. The local papers had articles about last night's shooting at the docks. The police were still investigating. A reward was offered to anyone with knowledge of what happened, but I wasn't worried about eyewitnesses. No one else had been there except the gang, and they wouldn't turn themselves in. The article mentioned a prominent figure in the Russian mafia had been murdered. The police feared it might be the start of a war between the Russians and whoever killed Vasily. Organized crime and gangs would have a field day with this one. I didn't know if the Russians would retaliate, but I didn't think Vasily had shared his blunder concerning Knox and my involvement with his comrades. If he did, someone would probably pay me a visit shortly. I'd just have to wait and see. Picking up the phone, I called Sergeant Rostakowski. She didn't answer, which meant she was busy doling out assignments and keeping the officers on task with the investigation, so I left her a message, saying I was just calling to check in and that I was fine. She wouldn't connect me to last night's mess. She'd never think I was stupid enough to get involved in something like that, and even if she did, she'd never share her suspicions with anyone. The only thing left for me to do was get rid of the ring. I'd give it back to Knox and call it a day. After slipping into casual clothes, I headed over to Knox's house. He told the security guards at the gate that I'd be stopping by, so they waved me through. I didn't see Knox's car parked out front. Considering the time, he might have gone to work. After yesterday, he had to come up with some excuse to give his boss. Food poisoning or a stomach virus were always good reasons to avoid the office, but Knox might not have thought of that. Knowing him, he probably went to work first thing in the morning to make up for lost time. When I knocked on the front door, it squeaked open. That wasn't good. Unholstering my gun, I edged toward the open door. "Mr. Knox?" I called. "Trey? Are you here?" I listened, but I didn't hear any movement. The security guards at the gate hadn't noticed anything amiss. Was it possible Knox had been in such a rush to get to the office he forgot to lock his door? "Knox!" I called again, stepping inside. His security system was deactivated. The sensors and cameras remained offline. Had he deactivated them? From a glance, the system didn't appear tampered with, but that didn't mean anything. "Hello?" The foyer didn't show any signs of a struggle. Neither did the living room or kitchen. I didn't see Knox's phone, keys, or attaché case anywhere. If he went out, he would have taken them with him. Maybe he really had left the door unlocked. But my gut said otherwise. "Is anyone here?" I continued through the house, checking each room as I went. Nothing appeared disturbed, no broken glass or missing items. Wouldn't the guards at the gate have told me Knox wasn't home when I arrived? Did they even pay attention? The neighborhood consisted of a dozen homes spread in a line on a dead-end street. It was supposed to be the ideal gated community. So where was Knox? Scuff marks on the floor halted my search. I crouched down, keeping one eye on my surroundings. Black, rubbery streaks marred the hard wood. The two narrow skids were roughly 8 inches apart. It looked like someone had been dragged. Beside the scuff marks were a few elliptical drops of what had to be blood. Carefully, I made my way into the bedroom. The bed was unmade, but the covers remained tucked in on 2 sides. No blood or other substances covered the exposed sheets, so I didn't think Knox had been attacked while asleep. I didn't spend too long analyzing the bedding, but I didn't notice any long hairs or other indications he'd had company last night. I checked the closet. No one was hiding inside, and nothing appeared missing. Taking a breath, I nudged open the bathroom door. The first thing I saw was my reflection in Knox's new mirror. Luckily, I didn't shoot the rough-looking guy staring back at me. The bathroom literally sparkled in the morning sun. The entire floor was covered in glass. I didn't know where it came from until I peered into the shower. The glass door had been decimated so entirely, not a single shard hung from the metal frame. A few drops of blood dotted the tiles. Now what do? I crouched down to get a better look at the shower drain. Using the tip of my pocket knife, I pried up the flimsy metal catcher. A dark red ring lined the edge of the drain. More blood. Possibly a lot more blood. I had no idea how much might have washed away. First things first, I sucked in some air and called Knox. After 5 rings, the call went to voicemail. I tried his office, but his assistant said he hadn't shown up for work in the last 2 days. "Did he call in sick?" I asked.
"No, we haven't heard from him since yesterday morning. He said something came up and he'd be a little late, but he never showed."
"Has anyone else called asking for him today?"
"No."
She considered the question for a moment.
"Why would you ask that?"
"Just wondering." I hung up before she could ask any more questions. Before replacing the hair catcher, I grabbed one of the cotton swabs from the container on the vanity and collected a sample of the blood from inside the drain and swiped Knox's toothbrush from the holder. I wasn't sure why I did that. I hadn't even figured out if Knox had been attacked or taken, but someone had bled in the bathroom. I had to find out who. I went into the kitchen and searched the cabinets until I found some sandwich bags. I put the cotton swab in one and the toothbrush in the other. That would have to suffice for DNA analysis. It should be that simple. TV made it seem that simple. I didn't know, and I didn't want to waste time calling Amir to ask what he'd need. He'd just have to make do with what I brought him. Before leaving the house, I went into Knox's study and checked the security system. Assuming the blood drops weren't caused by tripping in the tub and crashing through the shower door, which at this moment seemed just as plausible as anything else, I wanted to see what the security system showed. When I tried to check the logs, I realized the hard drives were gone. Someone did this. Knox could be alive or dead. He could be anywhere. And even though I told myself that as soon as I dropped the ring off I could wash my hands of this mess, I had to find out what happened to him, because the same fate could be waiting for me. Now what do I do? My mind raced. After last night, my instincts were to erase my presence and disappear. But that was stupid. Or was it? The guy at the gate buzzed me in. He knew I was supposed to see Knox. When Knox's employer or someone else called the police to report him missing, my name would come up in the course of the investigation. If the Russians had retaliated, they'd come for me next. Svetlana's body might have already surfaced. A tip could have been called in hours ago. The police could be getting a warrant for my arrest. If I called to report whatever this was, they'd find me, without any muss or fuss. I looked around the house. I'd gone through all the rooms, but I hadn't touched anything with my bare hands. The cold weather had forced me to wear my gloves, and I hadn't taken them off. That was a plus. I took the ring out of my pocket, carefully wiped it clean, and placed it in a drawer in Knox's study. The last thing I needed were the cops to find it at my place or the office. Think, Cross, think. I had used my cell phone to call Knox. At least I'd been smart enough to ditch the burner on my way home last night. Not that it mattered. Well, it might. I don't know. Geez, I was paranoid. Guilty was more accurate. Unsure how to proceed, I called Mr. Almeida. Who better than a lawyer to advise me in this situation? The woman who answered said he was in a client meeting. This is an emergency. I just need to speak to him for 2 minutes.
He'll call you back.
She hung up before I could resort to begging. I couldn't just wait around. I had to do something. I dialed the office. Justin, have you heard from Mr. Knox today?
No? What's wrong?
I cleared my throat. Has anyone been by the office asking for me?
Just Winnie from King Realty. She wanted to let you know the offer you made was officially accepted and everything's been signed.
No one else?
No.
All right. I need you to see if you can locate Knox. Try pinging his phone. If that doesn't work, pull his vehicle records, get his VIN, and check to see if he has an anti-theft system installed. Roadside assistance or a GPS system. I don't care what. I have to know where he is. While I waited for Justin to work some magic, I left Knox's house and went to speak with the guys at the gate. The rent-a-cop security guards were sitting inside the little shack, sipping coffee and eating bagels. They were watching a game show and bickering over if the showcase was worth more or less than the last contestant's bid. Mr. Knox isn't home, I said, interrupting them. The one in navy blue turned in the booth to look at Knox's house.
Hey, you're right. His car's not there.
No shit. What time did he leave? The one in navy exchanged a look with the other one in light blue.
Did you see him leave, Pete?
Pete rolled in front of the control panel.
His fob activated the gate at 8:02, but I don't remember seeing him.
Do you mind if I ask what happened? He knew I was coming. I just wondered if he had any unexpected guests or an emergency that caused him to rush out early this morning. Resting my forearms on the edge of the window to their booth, I tried to appear as non-threatening and concerned as possible.
Let me see.
The one in navy checked the logs.
Only a few delivery drivers came into the neighborhood this morning. Everyone else lives here, except you.
And Mr. Knox didn't leave any messages for me or anything?
Did you try calling him? He might have forgotten, Pete said.
He's not answering.
He's probably at work. You should check there.
Before I could ask any more questions, my phone rang. I looked down at the display. Almeida. Sorry to have bothered you. I held up my phone. I'll try back later. As soon as I was safely inside my car and halfway through the gate, I answered the call.
Lucien, what's wrong? Give me the short version.
My client's missing. His front door's open, and I found a broken shower door with some drops of blood in his bathroom. What should I do?
I'm gonna need a little more than that.
Knox is gone. I don't know where. The Russians tried to kill him yesterday. You know which Russians. He was fine, and today, he's gone.
Aren't those the ones I read about in the paper?
Yes?
The same one who?
Yeah.
Do you think they've taken him?
I don't know what's going on. He was supposed to be safe. This was supposed to be over.
Okay, calm down.
How can I calm down? A kill squad could be on their way to find me, or the police could be waiting at my house or office to arrest me for something I didn't do. How ironic, since I didn't think they'd ever find enough proof to arrest me for what I actually did. Almeida cursed quietly.
I'm in the middle of something here, but I'll get someone to make a few calls and find out if any warrants have been issued or are in the works. In the meantime, get your ass to my office. We'll discuss the rest in person and figure out your next move."
So I just leave the crime scene? What if the Russians try to pin this on me too? Shouldn't I call it in?
There's no body, no obvious signs of an attack or abduction. Despite what you think you know, can you say for certain a crime was even committed?
No. Without a body, there was no crime. My thoughts went to Svetlana, who'd been killed only 36 hours ago, and then shot with my gun. What about her body? Where was that? With Vasily gone, would it surface? Why hadn't I thought about this yesterday, before the shit hit the fan? Oh, God.
"Get over here. We'll figure this out,"
he promised. If nothing else, the law office might serve as a temporary sanctuary, or a purgatory until I was sent to hell. At least they had good coffee, plenty of booze. I'm on my way. Chapter 35.
"You stole his toothbrush."
Almeida stared wide-eyed at me. I want to make sure the blood is Knox's. It made sense when I did it. Frankly, it still made sense.
"That's tampering with evidence."
So don't tell anyone. I took a breath, forcing myself to focus. Explain to me how a toothbrush is evidence. At worst, I tampered with a crime scene, not evidence. And I thought we agreed Knox's house is not the scene of a crime unless additional facts to the contrary surface. Should the cops raid my office and discover the item, I'd say Knox was obsessed with dental hygiene and must have forgotten it after visiting our bathroom.
"I'm glad you were paying attention."
The attorney circled the room, absently straightening the framed degrees hanging on the wall.
"Any idea where Knox is?"
I'm looking into it. His phone's in airplane mode, so we can't get a location. As far as the whereabouts of his car, it was left in the parking garage at his office. Almeida turned around to face me.
"So he went to work."
It appears that way, except I spoke to his assistant. She said no one has heard from him since yesterday morning, and with that broken shower door and the blood, I'm not sure he's even alive.
"So you were the last person to see him?"
No, Justin was. I gently picked at the edge of the tape covering my nose. It had started to curl.
"You already caught me up on the fight in the street. Is there anything else I need to know?"
Vasily Petrov is dead. I thought that would solve everything. But now Knox is missing, and I have no idea what became of the dead hooker's body.
"The DA's office hasn't heard anything on the subject of the Russians. No warrant requests have come in. The police are still piecing everything together."
Last night's shooting didn't have anything to do with me, I lied, figuring I should start practicing now.
"Yeah, well, if the hooker's body surfaced, the DA's office would have heard about it. They didn't."
You asked?
"Give me some credit. I know how to get answers without asking questions. That's my job."
What do I do now?
"Sit tight. You haven't done anything wrong. You're jumping to conclusions, which, arguably, could be a hazard of working private security and growing up in a law enforcement family."
But we both knew that wasn't the cause of my anxiety.
"If the police suspect Knox's sudden disappearance is the result of foul play, they'll have questions. Don't speak to anyone without me there. I'll tell you when to avoid answering. But there's no reason not to be truthful. You went to see your client about a final payment. He was expecting you. You found it odd the front door was open, but thought he might have left it that way for you. When you couldn't find him, you searched the house, found the broken shower door, figured he slipped and had to go to the emergency room. You checked with the guards posted at the gate who had waved you into the neighborhood, and they told you they remembered him leaving. You called the office, but they hadn't seen him. That was it."
Great. At least I had my story straight. Now I just had to find out what actually happened to Trey Knox.
"As far as your other worries, I don't know what to tell you. Now that Vasily's dead, the others in his organization might not have any problem implicating him, but the police would be less likely to pursue charges against you if they suspect a dead gangster is responsible for his own sex worker's death."
Again with the optimism?
"Don't you pay me for positive outcomes?"
That I do. Groaning, I got out of the chair and rubbed my back. Had I not been facing a potential imminent arrest, I would have popped a few more pills. But being high wouldn't help matters, prescription or not.
One final thing,
Almeida said before I left his office.
If you can avoid the cops until your face heals, I'd suggest you do that. They might unfairly judge your appearance and arrest you for looking like a criminal.
With that cheery thought, I left the law firm and headed for Cross Security. Amir was meeting me there to collect the samples. He still had privileges at the lab where he previously worked, so he could perform a DNA comparison. Logic dictated the blood belonged to Knox, but I held out hope it wouldn't match, that it had belonged to his abductor, who would turn out to be some other loan shark that had nothing to do with the Russians and nothing to do with me. Call it wishful thinking, not that it was particularly upbeat, but it was the best I could manage at the moment. When I arrived at the office, Gloria was reading a magazine, while Justin quietly typed away. She looked up as the door opened, a surprised but pleasant expression on her face.
"Good afternoon, Mr. Cross."
She put the magazine down.
"I thought you were taking the day off."
"Relax." I glanced around the room, half expecting SWAT teams to be hiding in my office in the break room. "Is anything going on? Any meetings I should know about?" She gave me an odd look.
"No, sir. You asked me to cancel everything yesterday, remember?"
From the way she studied my expression, I wondered if she thought I was suffering from memory loss from the hits I'd taken. "No, I remember, but it's never a dull moment around here." I pointed at her magazine. "Don't stop on my account. I don't mind. Actually, since we're set to move into a new location pretty soon, I'll probably need you to work overtime for a few weeks, and the weekends. I know what an inconvenience that can be, so why don't you take the rest of this week and next week off while we prepare for the move? It'll be paid leave, of course, just some vacation time to make up for all the extra work I'm about to throw your way."
"Are you sure?"
"Absolutely."
"What about the calendar and meetings?"
"I'll deal with juggling the calendar, but our schedule's pretty light. Just some follow-ups." She scrunched her brows together.
"It's more than that."
"It'll be fine. Please, Gloria, if anyone deserves a break, it's you." Justin made a coughing noise, and I turned to look at him. "Don't worry, you'll get some time off too," I promised. Gloria still didn't look convinced, and glanced from me to Justin.
"Seriously, if Lucien's springing for extra paid vacation time, don't question it. Just go," Justin said. "You don't want to have him change his mind." "Okay," she said uncertainly. "At least let me order lunch for you guys before I go."
"Thanks." I smiled at her before heading toward the filing cabinets. I didn't need anything inside, but I wanted her to think I would handle the schedule so she would leave. After lunch was ordered, she grabbed her things, told me to call if anything changed, and headed out the door. The security detail I had tailing her would remain until I was convinced there was no threat. Sending her home was supposed to mitigate that, but sending her home with armed guards was even better.
"You're not serious about handling the calendar, are you?" Justin asked. "Since the day we met, I've never seen you schedule your own meetings."
"The day we met was when you were hired as my assistant. That's when you took over." He sighed dramatically.
"Should I be worried?"
"We should all be worried. Knox is gone." I pulled the zippered bags out of my pocket. "Amir is on his way to collect these."
"Is that blood?"
"Most likely."
"Is Trey Knox dead?"
"I don't know."
"But you think he is?"
"We don't know. His car is parked at work, and his phone is in airplane mode."
"I'll run his financials, see if there's been any activity recently."
He looked into it while I paced back and forth and tried to figure out what to do. Almeida made it clear that I should do nothing, but I had to know what happened. I had to be prepared. Getting blindsided by the police or some psycho hell-bent on revenge wouldn't end in my favor. The more I knew, the better, and the safer I'd be.
"Nothing," Justin said.
"I want to search his car, but I can't go near it."
"Do you want me to go?"
"No, the garage has cameras. This can't connect to me. For all I know, I could be getting framed for this too. You don't need to implicate yourself."
"So am I getting the next week and a half off too?"
"Not exactly." I cleared my throat. "I'm sorry. You can walk if you want. I'll understand, but I could use your help. I don't have anyone else I can ask."
"How can I walk when you say shit like that?"
"Don't be smart. It's up to you." He rolled his eyes.
"You know I got your back. Where do we begin?"
Before I could answer, Amir came through the door. He looked at the nearly empty office, one eyebrow lifting in question, You said you needed me to analyze something? He put his bag down on Gloria's desk and took out some papers. I hope it's less complicated than your previous request. I need to know if the blood belongs to the owner of this toothbrush. I held out the sandwich bags. Amir didn't even reach for them, his eyebrow arching even higher. Is this a test? No, I'm serious. You just want to know if they match? Yes. Amir sighed and took the bags from my hand. Okay, I can do that. Shouldn't take more than a few hours, possibly a day, to run the comparison. It'll depend on how degraded the samples are. He examined the bristles of the toothbrush through the plastic before tucking them inside his bag. Here. He held out a folder. What's this? I asked. The assignment you gave me? Not a lot here. I checked the data and came up with a list of cell phone users in the area at the dates and times in question. Just because those phones are pinged to those towers, it doesn't mean they were in the van or even in the vicinity of the pawn shop or self-storage facility. I just wanted you to know I did what you asked. I took the folder and flipped through the dozens of pages. There are a lot of names here. I told you it'd be pointless to do this. I skimmed past the list to the rest of the information Amir had dug up regarding the security system and the original break-in at Knox's house. Maybe not.
Why's that?
Justin asked, intrigued by our conversation.
Who's on the list?
I stared at the cell data from Knox's neighborhood at the time of the break-in. You sure Trey Knox's cell phone was in the vicinity when his security system was dismantled and his house was broken into? The nearest tower pinged his phone. He even sent a text message within 10 minutes of the time and date you gave me. Amir pointed to the data on the page. He was somewhere nearby. The bastard said he was at the office. He lied. Do you think he was at home when they broke in? I asked. Like I said before, I can't narrow it down that precisely, Amir said. He might have been on his way home, or he could have been anywhere within the vicinity of these two cell towers.
Why would he lie about where he was at the time of the break-in?
Justin asked. He didn't want the police to know what happened. After all, he didn't even want us to know who was responsible, or why they targeted him. He's covering something up. I just don't know what. But if he was there when someone broke into his place, wouldn't they have heard him? Amir asked. Not necessarily. I wasn't sure why they wouldn't. Then again, Vasily didn't try to hurt me the first time we met. Not physically. Perhaps he'd made Knox a similar offer. Get me the results of the DNA test as quickly as possible, and keep this between us. Whatever you want, Mr. Cross. Amir picked up the bag. I'll call you as soon as I have the results. Chapter 36. The blood from the drain matched the DNA sample from the toothbrush. Since that was the only toothbrush in the bathroom, and Trey Knox had told me he didn't like to entertain overnight guests, I had to believe it belonged to him. Amir told me the sample was male, AB negative.
Don't even think about it,
Justin warned.
Hacking medical records is a million different kinds of wrong. There are other ways to find out if Knox is AB negative.
I don't need to hack them. I know it's his blood, I said resolutely. Just like that's his toothbrush. What I don't know is what happened to him. Thoughts of the scuff marks on the hardwood floor came to mind. Someone dragged him. Considering the lack of significant amounts of blood on the floor, Knox couldn't have been too severely injured, unless he'd been wrapped in some kind of plastic sheeting. Glass shower doors didn't have shower curtains. If it had been a regular shower with an empty shower rod, I would have thought Knox's abductor wrapped his body in the curtain and dragged him out. But that wouldn't explain the scuff marks.
Your forehead's doing that prune thing.
I tore my eyes away from the DNA results. I'll ask about Botox when I visit the plastic surgeon. Will that make you happy? Pulling myself out of the chair, I stretched one leg, then the other. The frigid water and stress had done a number on my back. I might need a consultation or a few more sessions with a physical therapist to get everything back in proper working order, assuming whoever took Knox didn't come for me next.
You're only in your late 20s. You should wait until you hit 30 before you get work done. Or is it already too late for that? When's your birthday? Somehow the date has slipped my mind.
I glanced up at him, confused why he was bothering me with this nonsense. That's when I realized he was freaked out, just like I was. Look, it's cool. I got this. Go home, wash your hands of this mess. I'll take care of it.
No, I'm staying.
He watched as I shifted my hips from side to side, wincing as I moved.
I'll make an appointment with your doctor.
He reached for the phone.
Were you shot again?
Not that I know of. He snickered uncomfortably.
I think you'd know.
Hopefully. While he made the call, I examined the intel I'd gathered on Knox. Until the police started their own investigation, I shouldn't poke around. Mr. Almeida had advised against it. But Knox had been taken. The lack of a substantial amount of blood probably meant he was alive. He must have been in the shower when he was attacked. That would explain the broken shower door and the blood I'd found in the drain, and the few droplets on the bathroom floor. But since there hadn't been spatter, Knox's injuries must have been minor. Given the parallel and nearly identical scuff marks, I had to assume Knox had been allowed to dress after the incident in the shower. He must have put on his shoes before the abductor dragged him out of the bedroom. But why drag a conscious man? Knox could have put up a fight and had to be subdued. But the drag marks stopped at the bedroom door. Did he stop fighting and walk out on his own volition at that point? Or did the abductor have a friend who helped carry Knox's body out of the house? Someone grabbed the hard drives on the way out, which made the security system useless. The guards at the gate might know something, but they didn't remember seeing Knox drive away. Could they be in on it? I was in the middle of running a background check on the guards I'd spoken to today, which was the second time I'd investigated them, when a couple of police detectives came knocking. Automatically, I hit the power button on the computer.
Lucien Cross?
The older one asked. From the badge he held out, I knew he'd been on the force for a while. Sergeant? I said.
Detective,
he corrected, even though he had earned the rank of sergeant.
Moretti, this is Detective Renner.
He indicated the younger, eager man standing beside him. Newbie? I asked. Moretti snorted as if it were an inside joke between just us.
Do you have a few moments to spare, Mr. Cross?
Not particularly. Moretti didn't pay attention to a word I said.
We'll make this brief. I just have a few questions concerning your whereabouts this morning.
What about them? I bit my tongue before I said something flippant about jaywalking or traffic violations.
You stopped by Trey Knox's house around 11.
That's not a question. What happened to your face? Renner asked. I turned to him. Kickboxing class. He touched his own nose absently. First lesson? No.
You might need a refresher on the basics, like not getting hit in the face,
Renner said. I kept my expression neutral, though I had some suggestions I would have loved to share with him. Moretti sidestepped so he could stand in front of Renner. It was practically the equivalent of locking a misbehaving puppy in another room.
When's the last time you saw Mr. Knox?
Yesterday. He came by the office to speak with me, I said.
Concerning?
A case. He hired me to find some stolen property.
Did you?
Moretti asked. Find it? I didn't want to answer. Gallo suspected I'd called in the tip, as did Sergeant Rostakowski. I just didn't know if these two detectives had the same inkling. What division did you say you work for? Robbery should be all over it. Or is it called burglary? I can never keep those two straight. Someone has my information.
Mr. Knox's property was recovered by the police due to an anonymous tip.
Moretti stared at me with unyielding eyes.
What else did Knox want to discuss?
Our conversation's privileged.
No privilege exists between security personnel and their clients,
Moretti said. We could have an NDA, Moretti chuckled.
I was warned you'd be a pain in the ass. Look, let's just cut to the chase. Trey Knox never showed up to work yesterday. He didn't return home until after midnight last night. The guards at the gate remember seeing him leave his house this morning, but he didn't go to work. His boss called and asked us to check on him.
Sounds like he's playing hooky.
Probably,
Moretti stared at me.
Except aside from automated gate logs and the guards glimpsing his car entering and leaving, no one's seen him, except you.
I'm sure that's not true.
Did you see him?
Moretti turned to Justin, who'd done his best to blend into the background.
Yesterday. Yeah, he was here,
Justin said.
When did he leave?
Moretti asked. Justin shrugged.
I didn't notice the time.
Ballpark estimate,
Moretti said. It was after dark, I said. I left the office around 7. Renner jotted down a note, while Moretti continued to stare at Justin.
"Is that right?"
he asked.
"Sounds right," Justin said.
"I thought you were going to make this brief, Detective. We might not look it, but we're very busy," I said. Moretti smiled, as if we were old chums.
"You're right. Sorry about that. I get easily distracted. ADHD or OCD or some other acronym for catching on to little things that don't make a lot of sense."
"I'm starting to feel harassed," I said. "Justin, are you feeling harassed?"
"Should I call Mr. Almeida, your attorney?" Justin asked.
"That won't be necessary," Moretti said. "No one's being harassed."
"How about harangued?" I asked.
"That's not a legal issue the last time I checked," Moretti said. "I just have a few quick questions about this morning, and then we'll get out of your hair. Did you go inside Knox's house this morning?"
"Yes," I said.
"Did you notice anything amiss?"
"Yeah, I noticed he wasn't there. I wouldn't have gone inside if I'd known, but the door was open. I thought he left it that way for me. When I couldn't find him, I looked around. The shower door was broken, so I left and spoke to the guards at the gate. I figured Trey had tripped and fell. They told me he didn't call for an ambulance and that he'd driven away, so it couldn't have been that serious. I don't know any more than you do." Moretti continued to stare for another 5 seconds before turning and glancing at Renner. He jerked his chin toward the door.
"Let's go, kid."
Renner looked confused, but he obediently went to the door. I might be new to private security, but this homicide detective was still wet behind the ears. He couldn't be any newer. At least that would work in my favor should anything damning turn up. Moretti turned back to me, a business card materializing in his hand.
"Thank you for your time, Mr. Cross. If you hear from Mr. Knox, give me a call."
"Sure thing." I knew better than to ask, but I did anyway. "Is there any reason to think something's wrong? That something might have happened to him?"
"It's probably nothing. Then again, your dad's the commissioner, so you know the Detective Bureau doesn't normally get involved if it's nothing. Guess we'll just have to wait and see. You take care of yourself and get a steak on those eyes."
Chapter 37. After the police paid me a visit, I kept my own investigation to a minimum when it came to Knox's disappearance. That barred me from a lot of avenues I would have liked to explore. I couldn't risk asking questions or hacking surveillance cameras, not when a potential murder case was hanging over my head. Svetlana's body could surface at any time, possibly with Knox. Almeida warned me to stay as far from murder investigations as I could get, but I couldn't let forces beyond my control decide my fate. So I went back to my original leads and dug into the self-storage unit's records. Eric Beaufort, the phony identity that had rented the unit Vasily used to hold his contraband, traced back to the Russian mafia. In fact, so did Mr. Lenmire. He'd taken a hefty payout from someone closely associated with Vasily in exchange for putting his name on the paperwork, while Vasily used Lenmire LLC and its holdings to move merchandise. The moving vans from the self-storage facility routinely made trips to the docks to unload freight containers. Those shipments would then be kept inside storage units until they were dispersed directly to buyers or sold in Paulie's Pawn or another pawn shop. Of course, I discovered all of this too late. Club Nova wasn't part of Lenmire LLC. I dug and dug, but couldn't directly link it to Vasily or the Russian mafia. Vasily had to control it, or he had people working there. A part of me regretted my hasty decision to delete the video footage. If I'd been thinking more clearly instead of reacting, I could have recovered some of the deleted sections and figured out what Vasily had done with Svetlana's body, or had irrefutable proof he was the murderer. Instead, I spent hour upon hour hoping to get myself out of the hole I'd dug, which had only gotten deeper and darker since Knox's disappearance. "I need to go back to Knox's house," I muttered. It had been 3 days since the cops had stopped by. As far as I knew, Knox hadn't turned up. His credit cards had gone dormant. His phone battery had died. He'd simply vanished. Everything about his disappearance indicated he was dead, and I wanted to know who killed him. Maybe the police had gotten distracted with other things. They had a gang war to worry about. They didn't have time to waste on Trey Knox. Without a body, there was no crime. I headed over to his place, but I didn't want there to be any record of my return visit. Given the guard station and nature of the gated community, getting in wouldn't be easy. It took several hours of careful consideration and some climbing gear, but I found a way inside. Creeping up to Knox's house, I wondered if the police were watching. If they were, they'd probably arrest me on sight. But I didn't see any cars around. Just as I was about to try my luck with one of the first-floor windows, a police cruiser entered the gate. "Danger, danger," the voice in my head said. "Abort mission." Without waiting to see why the police had shown up, I dashed back to the breach point, went over the wall, and pulled the rope up and over behind me. I landed funny, my back twisting. It served me right for being so stupid. With Knox's house off limits, there was only one other place to check: his office. I dropped my car off and took a cab to his office building. When I entered the lobby, I spotted the security cameras. It would be impossible to conceal my visit, but it didn't matter. Knox had been my client. The cops could check to see why I stopped by. My questions would be about Knox's last known whereabouts and nothing else. It wouldn't be suspicious. If anything, it'd be expected.
"Mr. Cross?"
Margaret, Knox's assistant, looked up from the computer as I entered. I smiled at her. "You remembered." She stared at my face for a few moments, but was too polite to inquire as to what happened.
"I'm sorry, but Mr. Knox isn't here."
"When's the last time you spoke to him?"
"He hasn't been to work at all this week."
Her eyes darted to the left, and she got distracted with something on the desk beside her. "Do you know where he is?" She shook her head.
"The police stopped by. Mr. Stone called them when Trey didn't show up for work 2 days in a row. I told them the same thing I'm telling you."
Resting my palms against the desk, I turned up the charm. They can be rather annoying and intrusive. They came to see me, too. I thought it'd only be fair to check on him myself, seeing as how I'm a private investigator and all. She glanced at me.
"I'm sorry I can't help you."
My gut said she was lying. It's weird, isn't it? Trey was really into this job. It's all he talked about. And you're obviously an amazing assistant. Brilliant, I think is what he said. She blushed.
"That's sweet."
He said you'd do anything for him. I can't believe he'd just disappear without telling you he was taking off. She bit her lip, glancing at me before dropping her gaze back down. "He contacted you, didn't he?" I asked.
"No, not since the first day he missed. He called, like I told the cops."
She looked up at me.
"Like I told you. He said he was running late, but he never showed."
"Did he ask you to do something?" I knew there was more to the story. "You won't get in trouble. This can be our little secret."
"He asked me to have a courier send over the portfolio he kept in his desk drawer. He said he needed it to prepare for a meeting. I just figured he was running late. I didn't think he wouldn't come back."
"What was in it?"
"I don't know. It was a nice leather-bound portfolio. I always teased him it was his diary because he had this little lock hooked around the clasps to keep it closed. He said it was just data sheets and projections."
"So why the lock?" She shrugged.
"I asked him about it once, and he said it was to make sure it stayed closed. He's a freak when it comes to organization."
"Do you mind if I look around his office?" I asked.
"The police already did that. They didn't find anything, and Mr. Stone wouldn't like it if I let some outsider snoop around."
I don't blame him. I looked around, but didn't spot anything obvious. "Did you tell the police about the portfolio?"
"No,"
she said quickly. "May I ask why not?"
"I don't want to get in trouble. If that was proprietary info or something valuable to the company, I don't want Mr. Stone finding out I sent it over to Mr. Knox's house the day before he disappeared."
"Did he have to sign for it?" I asked. Knox had been holed up at Cross Security that day.
"No."
"One final question. Do you know if Mr. Knox's car is still parked in the garage?" She shook her head.
"Police impound."
"Did they find anything?" Again the head shake.
"Nothing. But that's good, right? It means wherever he is, he's okay."
"Let's hope so." But I doubted it. "Thanks for your time. If you hear from Mr. Knox or remember anything that might be helpful, I wouldn't mind a call."
"The police said the same thing,"
she said. "Yes, but they aren't nearly as much fun as I am, now are they?" As I left Knox's office, I couldn't help but wonder when he would have had time to make the call. I'd already checked his phone records. He could have contacted Margaret while I had him handcuffed to my steering wheel, assuming he had been able to get the phone out of his pocket, or had used the voice dial feature instead. But why would he want that portfolio? And could that be the reason someone broke into his house and abducted him? None of this made sense. The only thing I could determine was that it had been a ledger of what he owed Vasily, and he didn't want anyone at work to find it in the event of his demise. But that didn't make a lot of sense either. Nothing did. When I made it back to my office, I checked the phone records again and did a little more digging into Knox's office phone records. With the police snooping through everything, I had to be careful. If they caught me, it wouldn't be good. But the calls Knox made from his office phone prior to his disappearance were all work-related. The portfolio might not have anything to do with anything. I was tired of going around in circles. I just wanted to know if a threat remained. And the only way I could figure that out was by figuring out what happened to Trey Knox.
"Lucien,"
Justin called from the outer office.
"Jim Harrelson's on line 1.
I could think of only 2 reasons why he'd call, and if my father were dead, my mom would have told me. Thanks. I picked up the receiver and hit the button. Jim?
"A couple of detectives were just asking questions about you."
Moretti and Renner?
"Yeah."
What do you know about them?" I asked.
"I wouldn't worry about the snow pea."
That was his affectionate term for green detectives.
"But Moretti knows his shit. He's got a nose for things, and he doesn't have a good feeling about you. He thinks you're hiding something."
What did he want to know?
"He wanted to know about you and Trey Knox."
What did you tell him?
"What do you think? I don't know Trey Knox, and I sure as shit don't know what dumbass thing you're in the middle of. He spoke to Gallo about the recovery and the anonymous tip the cops got."
Uh-huh.
"He thinks you called it in."
Is he going to send me a thank you card?
"I don't know, but if you did something stupid, now's the time to be smart and fix it. Open your mouth, say whatever it is, and get it taken care of."
Did he find Knox? I asked. Jim didn't say anything for a long moment.
"You're actually concerned. You know, son, you would have made a good cop."
I'm not your son. He ignored it.
"You care. That's good. I'm guessing whatever happened, you tried to do the right thing. Have you been looking for Knox?"
I would never interfere in a police investigation. I could almost hear Jim rolling his eyes.
"Stop being stupid. If you know something or can help with this, you better. They think he's dead. You don't want to look like a suspect."
He hung up before I could respond. Blowing out a breath, I looked over the information I'd learned. One thing continued to bother me. Knox might have been at home when the original break-in occurred. That meant he watched Vasily's men take all of his belongings. I didn't know if that was true, but if it were, everything Knox said to me was a lie. That fit with the one thing I knew about Knox. He was a liar. If Knox had been at home, Vasily would have given him an ultimatum. Vasily wanted something from Knox, something more than just cash. And if Knox didn't do it, Vasily would have him punished. The Russian had been big on consequences. I just didn't know what Vasily would have wanted Knox to do for him or who was collecting in Vasily's place. After going over everything with a fine-tooth comb, I was no closer to figuring any of it out. No matter how I tried to tackle my problem, I ended up at a dead end. I had next to nothing on Svetlana, so I couldn't track her down or figure out if the police were looking for her. No Jane Does matching her description had shown up at the morgue. Almeida had a contact down there who checked. Freddie G. had his ear to the ground, and he had spoken to his Irish pals. They didn't know much of what was going on, just that they didn't trust the Russians and kept their business separate. I needed the cops to stop digging. Once they gave up the investigation, I could speak to Knox's coworkers, check his office computer, check the office security, go back to his house, dust and print everything, and speak to his neighbors and the security guards. But I couldn't do any of that without overlapping the cops and getting moved up on their radar. As it was, Detective Moretti already had a few suspicions about me. That's why he'd gone to Jim. They must have been tracking my movements. He probably spoke to Gallo, who said we'd met up there. Maybe Moretti had gotten the tip about KC's bar from my father. I wouldn't put it past the bastard. The intercom buzzed, and I gave it an odd look. Justin and I were the only two people in the office, and my door was open. Before I could ask what he wanted, Detective Snowpea came into view. I pressed the intercom button before Renner finished flashing his badge. "Send him in." Justin swiveled in his chair and glanced back at me. I nodded, and Justin turned around.
"Mr. Cross can see you now."
The man stepped into the room. He had to be around my age, possibly younger. Depending on when he got out of the academy, he might be one of the youngest cops to make detective. That should mean he was brilliant and talented, but I doubted it.
"Thanks for seeing me."
Renner looked down at my client chair. "Have a seat, Detective Renner."
"Thanks, sir."
"Seriously, man, how old are you?"
27.
"Then don't call me sir. Save that for my father."
"The commissioner." "Yes, sir."
I gave him a hard look.
"Right. Sorry, Mr. Cross."
Lucien. I didn't think it was an act. "This is your first case since making detective?" He didn't say anything, but from the gentle flush of his cheeks, I knew it was. "That's why they stuck you with that hard ass." Renner made a face. "He's right outside, isn't he?" I asked.
"Yes,
Oh well. After Moretti finished playing 20 questions with Justin, he stepped into my office. Divide and conquer was a good tactic, but Justin had vague down to a science. Moretti took a seat in the other empty chair and leaned back.
"Mr. Cross, I just had a conversation earlier today with Jim Harrelson. He said you work hard and always do the right thing. He also said you're a lousy tipper."
"You aren't supposed to tip the proprietor." Moretti pulled out his notepad.
"I just wanted to touch base with you. For the last few days, we've looked under every rock. We've got no leads on Mr. Knox's whereabouts. He hasn't returned to his home or shown up at his place of business. He hasn't contacted any friends or family, and he hasn't visited any of his normal hangouts. Nothing indicates he didn't just decide to disappear. But we have to be thorough. Most men with homes and jobs don't vanish without a trace."
"There's always that one." Moretti didn't appear amused. He was sharp. He'd seen a lot and knew there was more to this situation. It had something to do with the look in his eyes.
"I've been informed you're a private investigator."
"That's no secret. Says so on the door."
"Have you looked into Knox's disappearance?"
"A little." I should have said no.
"What have you found?"
"Nothing."
"Tell me why Knox hired you. What did he tell you about the break-in?"
"Not much. I went over a few vague details, avoiding anything and everything that might trace back to Vasily. Knox didn't know who broke into his house. I asked if he had any vengeful exes or disgruntled coworkers. He said no, and I found nothing to the contrary."
"Yeah, he seemed like a great guy."
Moretti tucked the notepad away.
"Any idea where he might go to if he decided to drop everything?"
"No idea."
"And you're sure he didn't have any problems? Work, money, family issues, anything like that?"
"Nothing," I said.
"That's what we got,"
Renner said. I almost smiled at his candidness. "Perhaps his assistant or one of his neighbors might be more helpful," I suggested.
"They weren't," Moretti said. "Knox kept to himself. No one knew much about him. We even canvassed the bars he went to, spoke to a few of his collector buddies. No one knows anything. We figured maybe he decided to follow the conventions."
"That sounds like him," I said. Moretti nodded.
"Well, anyway, we've done what we can. If you hear from him, let us know. And if you happen to stumble upon something that might tell us what happened, I'd like a call."
Again, Moretti handed me one of his business cards.
"Did he ever pay you?"
"What?"
"We checked his bank statements, but we didn't see any payments issued to you."
"No, I guess not. I'll have to work on streamlining our billing process."
"Well, if you're worried about getting paid, perhaps you'll be able to track him down. Good luck."
Moretti got up, followed by Renner.
"You know, there's one thing that's been bugging me."
"What's that?" I asked.
"Knox reported everything that had been stolen from his house in great detail, including a championship ring. When we searched his house for clues as to where he might be, we found the ring in his desk drawer."
"Odd," I said.
"Isn't it?"
Moretti asked.
We'll leave you alone now.
Chapter 38. The police thought I was involved in Knox's disappearance. That's why they went to the bar and came by my office. They wanted to rattle me. Moretti brought up the ring, but I didn't react. It meant nothing. But for the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was under surveillance. The cops didn't tail me in blue and whites. They used surveillance vans, as if I wouldn't notice. So I kept my head down and my nose to the grindstone. I had doctor's appointments and meetings to fill the hours. When I wasn't meeting with clients, or having MRIs of my back, or my nose reset, I had plenty to do for the impending move. Construction would finish on the new offices by next month. The basic bones and structure had been finished. Now they just had to set up the layout the way I wanted. I had to order equipment and hire movers, and take care of a million little things. Keeping busy helped keep my mind off the blade swinging above my head. As each day passed, the chances of getting caught lessened. No one came for me. Maybe Knox had freaked out and fled. With the constant police tail, my investigation into his disappearance had stalled. I didn't know what was what. My gut said the police thought I'd eventually lead them to Knox. So far I hadn't, which is why they continued to linger like a bad cold. Eventually they'd get tired and give up. I just had to be patient and stay focused on work. During a break between meetings, I found myself bored, studying a database on scuff marks. The ones I'd seen in Knox's bedroom might not have been from the heels of his shoes. They could have been from wheels on a piece of luggage. I'd barely looked inside Knox's closet, but most of his things had remained. Still, he could have packed light and vanished. Knowing Knox, he would have taken whatever remained of his precious collection with him before he fled. I tried to think, but I didn't notice anything missing from the shelves. However, after the break-in, most were bare. Maybe he ran. Vasily's men tried to kill him the day before his disappearance. I wouldn't have blamed him. Running might have been the safest move, especially if he owed other loan sharks or other gangsters money. Deciding to believe that, I slid the Knox files out of pending and into the closed file. Since I couldn't investigate with the police sniffing around me, I'd have to let it go. I'd just closed the drawer and retaken my seat when I received a message from one of my contacts who I'd reached out to about the sports memorabilia. Apparently, someone else had been asking around about acquiring a championship ring. My contact didn't have a name, but he gave me the person's handle. It took a couple days, but I traced the handle to an IP address. The user was located on a small tropical island nation without extradition. After that, I did more research and made some calls. "I don't think Trey Knox is dead," I said to Justin. "I think he's hiding in a non-extradition country." "Okay." The implication hung heavily in the air.